Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we're normally going week to week discussing something currently popular on streaming, mostly TV series. Currently, we are discussing The Pitt, we are discussing industry. We will be discussing A Night of Seven Kingdoms as it approaches its finale. Around the corner is Paradise, one of our most popular coverage here ever on the show. But in this little lull coming off of the Super Bowl, coming off of, or the ongoing Olympics, a little lull in the new releases, something that I've been trying to do for quite some time, rewatching other things, classic things, whether that be TV series, maybe some classics. For example, Mad Men, now recently released and upgraded for its HBO release, but also films. We have one of the most anticipated films of multiple years now, Christopher Nolan's adaptation of The Odyssey, coming this very summer, a follow-up to his Academy Award-winning Oppenheimer, massive success for him, obviously. A film that, despite being a historical biopic and mostly being close-ups of people talking vigorously to each other, made nearly $1 billion around the world. So Nolan has become a brand of his own, has become a series of his own, and we have begun to rewatch his entire filmography as we anticipate or approach the release of that Odyssey film. And we started with his very first film, following a $6,000 production, something he shot with his friends in the hallways of the very buildings they lived in and in their own apartments and family homes. On weekends, he assembled it on his own and was able to get this thing released. And that put him on the radar of some bigger budget productions, which led to his major breakout hit, Memento. Alan will be joining me for this conversation later on. However, unlike following, where I had only a handful of notes, mostly talking about how, this is interesting, this will turn up again in one of his future films. He loves noirs. He's hiding the low budget in some of the extreme black and white in that first film. So mostly that type of thing that I was curious about. From a plot perspective, he's interested in manipulating time, in giving us unreliable narrators, all themes in traditional noirs, and obviously something that repeats over and over again. So intriguing in that way, but the film itself, basically an extended student film. However, also on noir, all the things I just said about following, you could also apply to Memento. And yet it is such a leap in sophistication, and it all remains to be seen. We will rank these films when we get to the end of this series. But perhaps not only is this my introduction to him, but still perhaps his most interesting work for me. All that is to say that there will be a very long preamble here before Alan joins the conversation. I didn't expect it to go this long, but I took so many notes while I was watching the film, it basically became a script. So let me dig into the film, and if you want to jump directly to that conversation, do check the show notes. And if I do lose you along the way, I do hope you enjoy my commentary as much as I enjoyed watching the film again. If you have not seen it in a while and you are a fan of the film, do definitely rewatch it. If you watched the film in the past and struggled with it for some reason, hopefully this will give you some insight. But of course, later this week, continuing to cover Drops of God and The Pitt with my wife, and industry as we approach the end, continuing that conversation with Darren as well. Speaking of Darren, by the way, his son, a teenage son, has started to get into films. And of course, one of the very first gateways for any young film lover. I think they've been watching the Coen brothers films together, something else I'd love to explore here on the podcast. And Nolan is as well. And he has just watched Following with his son just yesterday, I believe it was. So maybe we'll touch on that conversation. I can't wait to do this with my daughter, by the way, as she gets a little bit older. Can't wait to introduce her to all these films I truly love. Most of them are rated, so we're waiting. We're waiting on a lot of these things. She's not going to see Blue Velvet until she's older, and probably not with me. I don't know if I want to watch that movie with her, to be honest, but I do want her to watch it at some point. So maybe I'll simply record a podcast for her and she can listen to it when she gets to that point. But we are still a few years away from that. But I will definitely bring this up with Darren when we touch base next week, and curious to see if he's also going to rewatch Memento. Okay, Memento, you can always just tell when you start watching a film that you're in good hands. And this is a perfect example of that. We set the tone immediately, and we don't have a protracted title sequence. We go directly into the title, the basic cast and this photograph, a Polaroid that is fading out. We are traveling backwards. The clear image of this person who's been shot in the head, a grim first image, actually running in reverse. So immediately, the story, or the film, I should say, is priming us for the mechanism in which the story will be told. Perhaps my favorite director, period, is David Lynch. And Lynch is obviously a big influence on Nolan, although Nolan is so cold. And for me, there's a real earthiness to Lynch's work, even as there can be some coldness to the way the characters interact, but the films never come off as cold, to me anyway. So in some ways, they really don't rhyme that much, but we do get this score immediately from David Julian, who worked frequently with Nolan early in his career. We heard his score in Following, in the previous film we covered, and there was a real glitchiness to the soundscape in that film, and we hear it here also. There are, in the two different trajectories of the story, these two parallel stories that are being told, one in reverse, one going forward. The forward, the more ruminative version of the score that often accompanies Leonard's internal monologue is very reminiscent of Angelo Badalamenti's scores for Lynch's films. And of course, Nolan will have these bombastic Hans Zimmer scores, Inception and beyond, and even in the Batman films. So the scope of his films changes, and some of his collaborators change, not always for the better, and we'll talk about that over the course of this ongoing exploration of the filmography. But in this moment, perfectly setting the tone, and a beautiful score, a really beautiful score. There is some of that glitchiness, usually in the action sequences, or where we're not sure. There are times where the film almost verges on a tone of horror because we don't know what to expect. There are some mysteries that truly disturb Leonard as he continues this investigation of his own psyche. And the score accentuates that with these icy, mysterious notes, or sometimes during the action, this more jangling electronic sound, which is very counterpoint to this sad and ruminative main score we hear here at the beginning. Now, this is an incredibly assured scripting exercise. And the way this script was originally written, Nolan, this is even before he had made Following, Nolan had gone on a road trip with his brother, Jonathan Nolan, who was still in college at the time, and they drove cross country from Chicago, from the middle of the country, to Los Angeles, where Nolan was actually planning to move. He was not making any headway in the movie business in the UK. He felt it was very much a closed system, you needed to have a lot of connections to even be able to get even small projects off the ground. And he was thinking of moving to California as a way to jumpstart his career. His brother, much younger, living in the US, still in college, as I mentioned. And on this road trip, his brother started to outline a story he was working on about someone who had short-term memory loss, was in a mental institution, and was, over the course of this story, a linear story, by the way, so very different than the script, was investigating this crime, the murder of his wife, and had mechanisms to remember his own notation and his own investigation. And spoiler alert for a story that I don't think you can even find anywhere, but I have seen copies of it out there. So perhaps minor spoiler alert if you're looking for that. Look for Memento Mori, by the way, if you want to look for a PDF that might be in the wild on the internet. I'm sure it's somewhere like archive.org or something. It's called Memento Mori by Jonathan Nolan. But in that story, eventually, our protagonist escapes from the mental institution, has solved the crime, finds the person who killed his wife. And there's really no ambiguity about anything that happens. By the way, I will be walking through the plot. Just want to mention this off the top, that I'll be walking through the plot, but I'm definitely going to spoil everything. So you probably want to watch the film before listening to this conversation, just in case. At the end of that road trip, Jonathan moved back to DC. I think that's where he was in school. And Christopher kept pushing him to say, hey, did you finish the story? Have you finished writing the story yet? Eventually adapting it himself. This is just research I've done recently, by the way. I had assumed that the idea from his brother really had already had the hook in it, obviously, that we see in the reversal of the storytelling. But it turns out, no, this is actually in the adaptation, in Nolan's adaptation of that pitch from his brother, that he decided, let's tell the story in reverse. And just an incredible, I don't know if it was just happenstance. I don't know how these things work, how, the brilliance of inspiration happens But whether he understood it or not, the fact that he now forces the story to be told in reverse forces us as viewers to be in the perspective of Leonard himself. We cannot know. It's not like telling the story in a linear way. You can imagine this very story told in a linear way. By the way, if you have the special edition DVD of this, there is an option to see all the scenes in sequence. And it works, by the way, if you do happen to watch the story that way. It's not as compelling as it is in this way, because the whole point of this, that we have the story moving forward and backwards in time, and we know that they're going to dovetail with each other, these two versions of the story coming together, is the revelation of who's responsible for this. With other noirs, of course, there might be a murder early on in the story, and then perhaps our protagonist is betrayed by someone in the final moments. Oh, it was the guy who hired him. Oh, it was his best friend. Oh, it was the femme fatale. The usual suspects, basically, in those stories. But in this scenario, we are playing detectives ourselves. We are constantly trying to explore what is happening, and not only who is responsible, but what of the perspective we are sharing with Leonard. What if this is even real? What if this is even true? And it starts to make you question really large questions about our existence, about being, about how, in the end, our version of reality is simply what we perceive, is simply the story we tell ourselves. And Leonard, of course, has to come up with the alternative ways to perpetuate that story, because he has lost his ability to create a new narrative. And it's a fascinating conceit. And another really fascinating aspect of this is that the film feels so grounded, and so much of this is in these fantastic performances from all of the cast here. The largest part of that being Guy Pearce's incredible performance, because we are literally in his perspective. We cannot know what is not in his perspective. He's in our POV character throughout the entirety of the film. His interiority is our interiority. His POV is our POV. Even like the Sammy Jenkins story, that whole side story is his recollection of it. And even that, as we're saying, oh, this is just a conceit. It's just a way where we get to see other characters that aren't in his POV by him telling the story, only to discover even that is subverted by the time we get to the end of the film. But this film is so schematic. I'll actually tell you at different checkpoints where we are in the film in these different moments. And on the page, this must have been so mechanical in the way that he actually broke down this story and put in these beats, and had to make this thing even legible at all to an audience. And incredible that he had the ability of conceiving this in this way, of having the vision of how this thing would work, if it would work at all. This is the type of film that it's not like you're going to do a lot of improvisation and then in the edit, you're going to figure it out. If this thing fails, it fails from moment one. And also to have this incredible confidence that the audience would be able to follow along, or that he would have the skill of spoon feeding us the information in just the right way, where we can understand how the story is being told and land this emotional wallop that comes late in the film. I was actually talking to Alan off mic, I believe, or through one of our chats, that I have a general rule of thumb that, especially if I'm talking to somebody and I'm telling them, you should watch this film, and they're like, I tried to watch that film, I can't get into it. And watching TV is so different. You can watch a television show, especially like a Netflix show, and you can kind of dip in and out and just kind of have it running in the background. And over time, it'll keep telling you what you're supposed to be paying attention to. And it's almost like you can just kind of leave it running. And over the course of the run of the show, you have figured out most of what you need to get to the end. And I think this is a really bad way to watch anything, my personal opinion. But it is the way we have been trained, because I think the people who make this content nowadays realize that we are distracted. We're watching our phones at the same time and second screening the Netflix show. And it's unfortunate, but there are so many great films from the 50s and the 60s and silent films and that go unwatched that I do feel that to a new audience would feel contemporary. I've had this experience of telling someone you should watch this, you should watch this. And they're like, I don't watch black and white films. I don't watch black and white films. And then eventually, like one of my nephews, for example, then eventually they watch and like, oh my God, that movie was so incredible. I'm like, I know. You just have to commit. You just have to commit. And here's my general rule of thumb. If a film is good, especially these classics that are like not just good, but like extraordinary. And even beyond, we're talking about 2001, I think now, when Memento came out, made in 2000, I believe. But I'm talking 80s, I'm talking 70s, I'm talking 50s. If you're having problems watching like one of these classic films, my general rule of thumb is give the film 10 minutes. You got to put the phone away. You got to close the blinds. Don't have the kids running around. You have to commit to the first 10 minutes of a film. And usually in that first 10 minutes, the film will set up all the stakes. Everything you need to know in the film is set up in those first 10 minutes. And more importantly, the film teaches you how to watch it. It will put you in, if it's a very slow story, then that is how you'll be introduced to this. And by the way, like just off the top of my head, a very obvious way you can, or I should say, a director who does this constantly, definitely Kubrick. And then, of course, inspired by Kubrick, definitely P.T. Anderson. You think about the first 10 minutes of One Battle After Another this year. You think about the first 10 minutes of There Will Be Blood. These two films, by the way, at completely different paces. Think about the first 10 minutes of Magnolia, where you're like shot out of a cannon, the camera's shooting through walls. And so completely different tempos, all three of those films from the same artist. But he is training you when you're sitting there watching those first 10 minutes. This is the speed at which you're going to receive this information. These are the characters you need to pay attention to. And this is the shape of the story. This is what we're trying to solve by the time we get to the end of the story. And that could be slow paced. That could be fast paced. That could be very visual. That can be very methodical. That could be very loose. But those first 10 minutes instruct you to a large extent of how to watch the rest of the film. But you got to commit. You can't be distracted and then come in 10 minutes later and be like, well, who is this? What's going on? A pet peeve of mine, by the way, my wife will tell me to do exactly that. Start the movie, I'll be there in a minute. And then she gets the sideline, she comes back, and she's only missed the first 8-10 minutes, and she has 100 questions. Because I'm like, yes, you missed the entire setup. So I'm going to have to explain things to you for the rest of the entire film. But all you need to do is commit to those first 10 minutes or so, and you get all that information. Then you can get looser with the way you watch it. But those first 10 minutes are essential. And in the first 10 minutes of this very film, think about what we see. We see the Polaroid reversing. The story is being told in reverse. We see, and this is, meta commentary here, but we see the casing of the discharged bullet rolling on the ground, shooting back into the gun, and the actual execution in reverse. I say it's meta commentary because we will see this very thing again in Tenet. So as we continue to go through his filmography, we are going to continuously see certain images. And this is true of all filmmakers, by the way, but certain motifs, certain interests, certain fixations will occur over and over again. And of course, the reverse shot, specific to Tenet, but maybe we'll see that even in some other films here in our rewatch. But of course, very importantly, in every single one of his films, every single one, we are playing with time. So he's not trying to trick us that this is, surprise, the story is being told in reverse. He's telling us in the first moments of the film that this is going to be a story told in reverse. And then we jump to the first black and white sequence. I believe there's 22 of these. You can actually go to the Wikipedia article and it shows you exactly where all the breaks are. 22 matching black and whites, 22 matching color sequences. And it's really interesting because you think about the blues and the sun-drenched and the oversized suit that guy Pearce's character, Leonard, wears in the film, which feels more like the 80s, by the way, not only in the styling, but also in the fact that nobody uses cell phones, although it's 2000. So almost everybody had cell phones. I mean, people are using cell phones in the X-Files in the early 90s. So by the mid 90s, everybody has a cell phone. You think about The Matrix, which came out in 99. And of course, by then the cell phone was ubiquitous, but no cell phones here. So it is intentionally setting the film, making it feel like it could be the 80s. It could be the 70s. This could be the long goodbye. And of course, Nolan, such a student of noir for sure, is showing us this sun-drenched California neo-noir, something that was popular throughout the 70s and definitely in the early 80s. And Lynch has made some of these California set sun-drenched noirs himself. But then, of course, we cut to our parallel story, this one moving forward in time, and it immediately feels like a traditional noir. We are in a hotel room. How many times have you watched a noir where the detective is holed up in his hotel room? on the phone. We don't know he's on the phone actually in this moment, but narrating his own story, the internal monologue, another convention of the genre. And the other thing we see is he awakes for the first time and he says, I'm awake. Here's where I am, a new place. Where am I? And that experience of waking up every time and being reintroduced to the world over and over again only gains emotional weight as the film continues. And he gets to shoehorn, he has the best of both worlds, basically. He has an old school black and white noir, and he has a California set, sun-drenched neo-noir in the same film. But again, either as a byproduct of this initial inspiration to tell the story in reverse, or all by design from moment one. By doing this, Nolan allows himself and allows us as viewers to deconstruct the very familiar beats of a noir film. There always is the femme fatale. Is this woman there as a victim? Is she there as a manipulator, as a perpetrator? We don't know. And we bring our own biases based on all these stories we've seen before to the material. And we have to interrogate it. We cannot passively just let it wash over us like you may very well watch many noirs and just be like, well, I know what role she fills. I know what role this guy fills. I've seen this 100 times before. We have to interrogate all of this because we are out of context constantly out of context. The context comes later, not first. And just thinking about, as part of this recontextualization of the noir concepts itself, it makes me just think, even myself watching this again, that what the noir represents itself. It's, in general, we have films that are shot in liminal spaces, in between spaces, in lobbies, in hotel rooms. Hotels are non-permanent by definition, in parking lots, in bars. These are literally films that are almost exclusively shot outside of homes, outside of any familiar surroundings. Everybody is out of context in noir films themselves, but Leonard himself, as a person, is a liminal space. He is an in-between space. He has no context. And it's just an incredible paralleling that he makes here. And once again, I'm not sure if he's such a genius. He thought of all of this right in the construction of this film. But I can't help but be thrilled, honestly, to watch this again, which, a little context there too. My wife brought this up when in our most recent conversation talking about the Pitt, but I mentioned we were going to discuss Memento this week. And she said that, that was one of the first films that I made her watch. I made her watch because it's one of my favorite films. And it's just a film that gets richer each time around. But I do not think I've watched the film all the way through since whenever that was, after having seen it many times over the course of my life, but probably never again all the way through since watching it with her over a decade ago at this point. And still holds up and still I keep finding more thematic richness in it as I get older, as I watch more films, as I watch Nolan's films. It's quite an impressive piece of work. And at this point, I'm only a few minutes into the film here, but you see that first moment in color, the film in reverse, then the black and white, a man in a hotel room in black and white, out of context, this traveling back forwards in time. Then the very next scene, we meet Teddy for the first time, the very man who will be shot in that opening sequence. So what's the relationship between these two people? And by the time we get to the end of that first 10-minute mark, as I mentioned, those first 10 minutes, we have realized that we're going to see the film, those black and white sequences, the day of some very important event. And we are headed in two different directions towards the same moment in the story. And rather than waiting for some terrible outcome to happen, we've seen the terrible outcome. And now we have to ask ourselves, why has this happened? And you just think about that at that moment. Would this even be compelling if a movie ends in the middle of the story? You would think there's no way this is going to be a compelling watch. And yet it really, truly is. But we're still within that first 10 minutes. We go back 3 times, I believe, over the course of those 10 minutes. And by the end of those 10 minutes, we have now got enough context to realize this is why he has killed Teddy, the man who killed his wife. But Teddy's confronted him. Do you know what you have become? Do you really know who you are? He seems to know Leonard very intimately. How has it come to this, that this man that he's been pursuing because of this condition he has, that he's been working with this killer the whole entire time, unaware. So who do you trust? Does he trust himself? Does he trust what he's hearing? We have a lot of doubts, as does Leonard, presumably. But Leonard has to stick to his conditioning because he has nothing else. And another great detail in this 10-minute opening sequence, we see the tattoo on his hand, but then more than that, we see him notice the tattoos on his own body. And then for the first time, seeing just how expansive the tattooing is on his body. I love the detail, by the way, that as he is doing this commentary, his internal monologue, he sees the tattoos again on his body. And just like waking up in the same room and uncertain of where he is, the revelation over and over again that he is covered in tattoos, something that he is in some way probably aware of. He does instruct that, well, of course, this is the way to document this, that I know that I won't lose it. These important facts, the facts. But is he saying that because, of course, this is true? Or does he wake up and find that he's covered with tattoos and then he's rationalizing that, of course, this is exactly what a rational person would do? A question he actually asks himself over the course of the film. Not about the tattoo specifically, but the question is, do you just fake it when you want to fit in? You want to act normal. You want to pretend like this is normal. And of course, the richness of all of this doesn't come to the fore until much later in the film, but all this context is already there in those first 10 minutes of the film. A pattern is established. We're getting conditioned by the film itself. And there's already so much richness just in the introductory elements of the story. He has these Polaroids, an instant way of having the images. He doesn't have to have them developed. Of course, if he had a smartphone, which didn't exist at the time, you could have instant images, but then the smartphone could be stolen from you potentially. But he takes these Polaroids, he has the images quickly available to him. He writes everything down. And the facts, the really important stuff, he tattoos onto his body. It's permanent. It's indisputable. Or is it? Yet one more digression I will throw into this already long preamble. There is a Radiolab episode, I'll try to track it down and put it in the show notes, in which they talk about someone who, due to untreated syphilis, has exactly or very similarly this condition. And it's so compelling to listen to the audio of that episode where the wife goes and visits him at this mental institution. He used to be a music teacher. When he plays music, he still immediately becomes the person he was before. Truly fascinating transformation. But most importantly, to the conversation here, is that he meets with her. There's audio of them hanging out together. And by the time she gets home, there are multiple phone calls from him where he's despondent, being like, I haven't seen you in so long. Why haven't you come to visit me? And multiple calls to her in the interval between her leaving the institution and arriving at home, because he does not only not remember that she has just been there, but is calling repeatedly because he doesn't even remember making the call to her, asking her to come visit. And after this initial setup, the film starts to move. It starts to get momentum. And first of all, there is such a long time. You think about how schematic this film is, that you can almost chop it up into 4 parts, or you can chop it up into thirds, you can chop it up into quarters, and literally stop the film at any one of these important set points, and something essential is happening. Explicit pivots in the story in those particular breakpoints. And that's how designed this script probably was, although it feels so loose, it feels so natural, it feels so earthy and emotional at times because of these excellent performances, no doubt. But this could have very easily felt very cold and intellectual, given how rigorous it is. But even in rewatching it, I think to myself, how does he keep this interesting? There's such a long time before we get to the big revelations later on. And the way he does this is very much so in each one of those iterating segments. Of course, traveling back through time, each one of those breakpoints gives us another clue. It really feels like we have a noir where each scene, the investigator discovers something new. But in this case, it's something that's already known. We already know the final destination, but to us, we are acquiring the clues to the finale in reverse order. And each one of those accrual of those clues is really fascinating as we start to build the case against the person who's been killed. But then, of course, we get to the middle of the film, and then we start to ask ourselves, well, did we build this case correctly? And then, of course, that in and of itself is the question that noirs and police procedurals in general oftentimes are asking us, that did we come to the right conclusion? But this conversational episodes, the voiceover sequences, the black and white sequences that are moving forward in time, how do we make that compelling? And the way he makes that compelling is by introducing another kernel, another clue to his condition, to making us question his condition. And that's what's so fascinating about it. At the beginning, we have the confidence that he has apparently killed the right guy. And this guy was a bad guy who was manipulating him in some ways, hanging out with him, maybe keeping an eye on him because he's the perpetrator of this crime. And as we discover more about his condition, we're like, yeah, you can condition yourself to learn things that you can't memorize. You have to have a system that keeps that moors you to the world. And we all do, right? Leonard needs a lot more of that assistance because he's in so many ways, the basic mooring we have to the world around us is our perception of it. And he cannot create new perceptions to the current world. He is relying exclusively on these techniques plus his memory of what came before. So the whole first quarter of the film is setting this up, his system and the facts of the case, not only the facts of the case that are in the investigative papers, but the facts of the case of what led to the murder of this villain in the story itself. But speaking of conditioning, again, something that Nolan innately understands immediately as a filmmaker, he's adding one additional detail each time we iterate backwards. It's a fact about how this condition works. It's a fact of what has led to this moment, the history, the immediate history of the incident we see at the beginning of the film. But beyond that, just visually, the simplicity of adding one visual detail that we key in on. For example, when we see Natalie for the first time we see her with the split lip. And immediately we ask ourselves, well, who did that to her? What's her backstory? Why would she have a split lip? And of course, it turns out, well, Leonard did it. Leonard did it is the answer to a lot of mysteries in this film. And of course, we assume that Leonard has noticed this as well, but he doesn't ask her about it because he knows that if he's supposed to know how she got that split lip, it's only irritating her in him having to pretend again that things aren't as difficult for him as they obviously are. And for his own motivations, he's not going to remember this later on anyway. So the film is forcing us to perform the cognitive gymnastics to understand what's happening that he literally is incapable of doing. And just that in and of itself is so powerful because it's forcing you to appreciate something you can do that he cannot. It's forcing you to empathize with his limitations, but it makes us very wary that he is working on bad information, which again is so key to the very noir concept. And as opposed to when you watch a noir and you're like, well, I know exactly where this is headed. And oh, they got me. They tricked me. In this particular case, it's like, I don't know where we're headed. I don't know if I can trust anything I'm seeing here. So it's immediately putting you on your back foot. In that conversation with Natalie, we get this first flashback, this almost Malick-like reverie, him with his wife, an idealized version of the life that came before. But of course, these spiky traumas as we see flashes of the day that she supposedly died. And of course, we continuously, in this reversal, we find out about Sammy Jenkins over and over again. The tattoo on his hand, constantly reminding himself, remember Sammy Jenkins. Sammy Jenkins, by the way. I always say Jenkins, but Jenkins. Played by Stephen Tobolowsky, by the way. And the Sammy Jenkins subplot is so important because it turns out, as we watch the film, that is foundational to everything we are seeing here. It is that he was an investigator in a previous life, not a police investigator, but an insurance investigator. That Sammy Jenkins was a traumatic memory he has that he was wrong about his assumptions. And in being wrong by his assumptions, there was this tragic outcome. But there's even more to this character's backstory in and of itself. Because like so many times, if you've probably told the story so many times, or you've had a friend. Do you ever have that experience where your friend keeps telling the same story, you've been hearing it for decades, and then all of a sudden it's not like, well, one time I was in the city and this thing happened to my friend. All of a sudden they say that story happened to me. And I had an experience of that, by the way, where someone was just recently telling a story and it was my story. And now, of course, over decades, the story had become, well, that happened to me. Well, may very well be the case that in this particular scenario, that Leonard has actually said something that happened to him has happened to Sammy, because it is easier than accepting the truth. And of course, there's also a very important conversation between Teddy and Leonard, in which Teddy asks him that very question. How do you know that you're right? How do you know these facts are true? You can't remember anything. And he's correct. Memory, just like in the example of the story I just mentioned, can be manipulated. Your own memory can be wrong. And of course, by the end of the movie, we start to question even the memories, the nostalgic memories of how great things were before. But it continues to be so amazing to me as I'm watching the film, that the ability of creating this urgency and making the film not boring when there is so much that could feel too methodical and too thought out and too much placeholding or waiting for the big revelations at the end. And amazing, and this is something that is true of pretty much all of Nolan's work, that even in this really honestly very grim film that is thematically very upsetting when you get to the end, there is so much comedy in here. And that's part of what makes this so watchable. Him being in this situation, everybody busting his chops repeatedly about what's going on, and him having to react to it over and over again, him pretending like everything's okay, and which is tragic and comedic at the same time. But you think about the whole subplot with Dodd, just that sequence of him pursuing Dodd, so much comedy in that. First of all, that he comes to, hold on a second, where was I? Where was I? Something that comes up as a comedic beat multiple times. He's lost his train of thought. This is actually true, by the way, that one of the triggers for losing your moment of train of thought, if you have this condition, not being able to hold the narrative in your mind, is being stressed out. So being stressed out will abbreviate the amount of time that you can actually hold in your memory, just because you get distracted from one thought to the other. And of course, in a very stressful moment, he's running away from Dodd, comes to, and of course we in this experience come to as he's running as well, unaware of the fact that, okay, I'm chasing this guy. Oh no, he's chasing me. He literally runs into the arms practically of the guy who's chasing him with a gun. And the whole fallout of that, he gets to his hotel room before Dodd does, only to forget why he's there and assume he's in his own hotel room and take a shower in the house, in the hotel room of the guy who supposedly is pursuing him. And then to call Teddy based on this note, without even the full context of who Teddy is. Teddy's like, what's this guy doing here? When he finds the body he's not dead, actually, he's alive, when finding Dodd in the closet. And he's like, how am I supposed to know? This is like a Laurel and Hardy skit at this point. It's very funny stuff in a very grim film. And part of the way that he keeps us distracted and engaged in the material, wondering, well, where's this all headed? And then, of course, as we're going backwards through the story with Dodd and that pursuit, and who the hell is Dodd, and going to see Natalie again now. We've only seen her briefly earlier. Now we get to the heart of the relationship between him and Natalie. And then we start to realize, he's even said this, I think someone's messing with me. I think someone's trying to get me to kill the wrong person. And we're like, oh, there it is. The femme fatale has arrived. That is Natalie. Natalie's manipulating him, has some shady dealings. She wants to get rid of Teddy. Teddy has overtly said, do not hang out with her. This is the crux of it. She's the one who is setting him up to kill Teddy. And that's how we got to the beginning of the film, AKA the end of the story. And then immediately, the film again deconstructs that. We go from she's obviously the femme fatale and she's manipulating him, to then go backwards in time. And this deep empathy she has with him. Her boyfriend is dead as well. Who could have done that? As usual, the answer is Leonard. And she's suffering this loss and commiserating with the very person who created this. And he is a cipher. He literally is not even aware. She may suspect that he minimally is involved with the death or disappearance of her boyfriend, if not fully responsible for it. But she knows that. And he's not a threat, even though she may very well understand that because of the way he is. the way he forgets immediately after committing these acts. She actually witnesses that whole thing happen. So she may very well fully understand exactly what he is, and yet can trust him, is the confidant and someone who she can actually share the loss of her boyfriend with, because it's that beautiful scene, an absolutely beautiful scene where they're in bed together and he is talking and she's laying on his chest, and she is the surrogate for his dead wife and he is the surrogate for her dead boyfriend. And he is talking out loud about how hard it is for him to forget his wife. How can I heal when I can't feel time? And her eyes open when she hears that. She will be able to move on beyond this, but it will take time. And he somehow can obliviously live in this moment, which is, unfortunately for him, maybe the most painful moment of his life, which, regardless of the horrible things he does, makes him sympathetic to her, or I should say, makes her sympathetic to his condition. And there are so many really fascinating themes that run throughout the whole entire film. And one of them is this idea of certainty. We intrinsically understand that there are some limitations to how sure you can be about anything. But in this film, we cannot be sure of our memories, can't be sure of the facts that are tattooed on Leonard's body. Nothing has any surety to it. And everything will degrade. The very system that he has defined, that he has rigorously, the only way he can operate is by believing that he is being rigorous to this system, he himself has manipulated. Why have those files disappeared from the police records? Why have some of the tattoos, if you notice carefully, have been like, it's Jim or John, right? And written like in marker. So why this addendum? What has happened along the way that has allowed this corruption to happen? And the corruption of his memory as well. We explicitly know, or we believe by the time we get to the end, that his own memories are untrustworthy. And who can you trust? What people can you trust? Your own memories, your own systems. All of this is to say that we are, as people, adrift. I have to believe that when I close my eyes, the world outside of me still exists. And that is the crux of the whole entire film. And explicitly, we're driven to that understanding in being forced into Leonard's perspective. And speaking to like the extremely rigid formality of the script itself, at about half an hour into the film, we have our first deep investigation of Sammy Jenkins' backstory. At exactly the midpoint, the misdirect with Natalie, which blossoms into a whole different aspect of the story. And then at exactly 1.5 hours in, the film becomes really, this last 20 minutes of the film is incredible. But as we get to that 1.5 hour, literally you can mark it. Go to 1 hour and 30 minutes if you have this film available to you. And what we see is the backstory to Jenkins again in this institution. And as the orderly passes in front of Jenkins for just a split second, we see that it is actually Leonard sitting in that chair. Leonard has conflated this story, the story of Sammy and his own story. He was in an institution, maybe going back to the original Jonathan Nolan story. He was there, he escaped, and now this is the last section of that story, but told in this out of order sequence, and with all the context from before cut out, so that we are forced to rely on this, the most unreliable narrator possibly of any noir ever. And the film starts to toy with true dread and horror. The peeling back of the tattoo on his arm, never answer the phone, in hilariously scrawled marker, like it's something out of a cartoon practically, but chilling because he's on the phone at that moment. So why not answer the phone? What are you running away from? Who is trying to manipulate you? Who are you on the phone with? And then when he refuses to answer the phone, that envelope sliding under the door, again, incredibly chilling, something almost primal about this, and him pulling out the photograph, the Polaroid, of him smiling and pointing at that spot on his chest. A blank spot on his chest that, by the way, when he talked to Natalie and she was shocked to see his tattoos, she asks, what's this spot for, this blank spot here? And he goes, maybe it's for when I catch the guy. And then, of course, we see this image where he is pointing right there, right there. Why is he pointing there? First of all, he's taken all the Polaroids. Who is taking this Polaroid? Had to be someone he trusted a lot. And why is he pointing there on his chest? The spot he said he would mark when he caught the bad guy. And at this moment, in this final section of the film, everything comes together. And I remember the first time I watched this in the theater, my heart was pounding because at this point I was so misdirected. What is happening? But I could not wait, just utterly thrilled, could not wait to figure out or have revealed to me what is actually happening in the story. And of course, seeing it again, it's a whole different experience. My heart is no longer thundering in anticipation. I know exactly what's going to happen. But so many incredible details that make this thing so rich for re-exploration. I love when he arrives at the bar and meets Natalie for the first time. The last time we see her in the story, in our film, but the first time he meets her. And she leans forward, looks inside the car. She thinks it's Jimmy. And when he walks inside afterwards, and they have this very difficult conversation, she's wondering, why is he driving Jimmy's car? Why is he wearing Jimmy's clothes? He's been in this oversized suit the whole entire time. There's so much Bowie iconography, by the way, David Bowie iconography across all of Nolan's films. And I can't help but think about Bowie in the oversized suits doing his White Duke. What was the Thin White Duke character? And the bleach blonde, spiky hair of Guy Pearce, another very lean surrogate for Bowie here. So definitely that's something that is imagery that is stuck in Nolan's mind. But he's wearing this oversized suit, can't really fit Jimmy's shoes, and says to Natalie, I'm supposed to meet you here. Aren't you, Natalie? I found this note in my pocket. And she just says, your pocket, in that way, your pocket. And of course, we know only upon rewatch that she's aware at this moment that something bad has happened to Jimmy, and this guy's almost certainly involved. And soon thereafter, of course, we realize that, yes, indeed, it has been headed here the whole entire way. The villain here is Leonard. Leonard has killed Jimmy, a drug dealer, maybe not a great guy. And he may very well have been in on this manipulation of Leonard for other reasons, because he seems to know about his memory issue. He seems to be familiar with Teddy, upset that Teddy has set him up. But Leonard, of course, has murdered Jimmy here and snaps a picture of him, thinking that he has fully, redeemed this revenge arc that the film has been setting up. And still at this moment, we think that maybe this is the right guy. And then he goes and accidentally kills Teddy, John Gamel, by the end of the chronology here of the story. Again, such a cool little technique here, by the way, snaps the Polaroid picture. And as the Polaroid picture fades in, we go to color. So this is the final sequence, the final black and white sequence, him in this flannel, arriving at this place, killing Jimmy, taking the photograph, it fades in, the color comes into the film, and now we are in the final color sequence of the film. And this is where the story resolves. And he puts on the suit, what we've been seeing him wear the whole entire film, and he's about to take this car. But before all that, of course, Teddy walks in, and Teddy starts to confront him. He says, you're messing with me. Oh, by the way, should very importantly mention that before he strangles Jimmy, Jimmy eventually dies, probably because of that bonk on the head he receives when he gets dragged down into the basement. But he drops him because he says Sammy while he's being dragged down the stairs. And Leonard thinks to himself, how does he know about Sammy? Why would I have told this guy about Sammy? And he starts to think, again, very suspicious, that something is not quite right here. Who might be responsible? Teddy has arrived in his car. He sees Teddy, don't trust him, something that he has been setting up himself. Teddy comes in. He starts to ask him questions. And this is when Teddy lays everything out. I was the detective. And by the way, this is something I really like about this film that I wasn't 100% on board with, or I should say that I didn't like all the spoon feeding of reality that we got from Following, considering that we had such an elegant and ambiguous story represented in the very follow-up. Of course, he's maturing as a filmmaker, but also has a lot more trust in his skill, a lot more trust in the audience. Because even here, again, how much of this do we believe is true? Teddy says, I was the cop who did the investigation. We caught the guy. You were right. There were two people. In the flashback, by the way, it does seem that he shoots the one guy and then he still gets attacked from behind. So does seem to be two people. We caught him. I took that picture. You had such a smile on your face. I thought this was going to stick. This is the critique that Leonard had about Sammy, that there was a recognition in his eyes. It was going to stick. He could condition himself. He could remember, but it didn't stick. Sammy was a liar. You were right. Sammy wasn't married. The story, the dead wife, the insulin overdose. Horrible tragedy here, by the way. I didn't mention that at all. But seeing how things turned out in the story for Sammy, that he, of course, is in the institution in that moment, the one where we see that it's actually Leonard. And Leonard saying in voiceover, he's not even aware that he did this to his wife. He's not even aware because he is in this infinite now and is incapable of remembering the acts that he did. But of course, as he's saying this, the revelation in visually that it's actually Leonard himself. Or is it? Is this just Leonard empathizing with the character and projecting himself into his own memory? Or is this a reveal that he's actually is this person? If we go by what Teddy tells him, then obviously he indeed did this, and he did kill his wife with an insulin overdose. And there are clues throughout the rest of the film that we do have to consider. The pinch on her thigh, and then the memory that it was an insulin injection. Not only that, the styling. The actress who plays his wife, the actress who plays Sammy Jenkins' wife, in practically identical outfits at different times with the same hairstyling. So he's merging these memories together. And then, of course, the final reveal. He storms out. He's taken this uniform. He's going to drive Jimmy's car around. Teddy thinks this is a terrible idea. And then he writes down his license plate number. Who has been setting up Lenny this whole entire time? The truly shocking revelation. The first time I saw this, it took the wind out of me to realize that, oh my God, this whole time, this guy with this system, with his rules and his regulations, he has done this to himself. And it's such a perfect ending. And it's such a tragic ending because here's somebody whose only purpose in life, he has invented this vendetta to go on all the time. It has turned him into a serial killer. Teddy has been taking advantage of him. Presumably, this has happened many times before. And Teddy, by the way, let's not feel too bad for Teddy. It seems like he has been killing off drug dealers and other bad guys and taking their money. So he has to put an end to this. How does he put an end to him being a Terminator, like someone who is killing without remorse, the exact opposite of what he considers himself to be? He could write down that Teddy's manipulating you. Don't listen to anything he says. You already killed. You did it. I did it. By the way, we do see one more flashback to him and his wife, her head on his chest. And on that spot on his chest, it says, I did it. I did it. And we see the tattoo already across his chest written in reverse. So one of his first tattoos is there, plus this I did it. So almost certainly the case that Teddy has told us the truth. Or it could be a paranoid fantasy that he's having at that moment. However, I do believe it's true. But it's up to you to believe it or not. But still, the incredible finale here, this revelation that he could now at this moment write it all down, put this all down, tattoo it on my thigh so that I remember forever that I cannot do this again. I've been wrong about everything, but he cannot live in that world. So what he's going to do is going to kill Teddy so that Teddy cannot manipulate him again into doing some horrible thing in the future. However, he continues to live in his own version of his world where he is the wronged person. He is the victim here. He is just pursuing the murderer of his wife when actually his wife wasn't murdered. I mean, she was, of course, assaulted. It was a horrible attack, not to minimize that, but she survived the attack. She died because of his actions, unintentional as they were, and he cannot live with any of that. So he is going to invent a world in which he thinks he can live with this. But what's his life going to be like? He's going to be directionless. He's going to still believe this case is unsolved. And who knows, someone else will come along, maybe Natalie, and continue to manipulate him. And we, of course, have that incredible last sequence, him in the car, closing his eyes. I have to believe when I close my eyes, the world out there still exists. He opens his eyes, goes, yeah, I can live with that. I believe it. He sees a tattoo parlor, slams on the brakes, and then one more joke on the way out the door in this very grim ending. Now, where was I? And speaking of Bowie, we have David Bowie on the soundtrack here at the end, Something in the Air. All right, what a preamble. Sorry for all that, but I was very enthusiastic in rewatching this film, so I had to put that all out there. Didn't even mention some really great scenes. I'll probably get into this in a lot more detail when I discuss this with Alan in the upcoming conversation. But just the beautiful sequences of him with the prostitute in the hotel, trying to punish himself in so many ways this revelation that he'll wake up in the night, see his wife's things, and then asking her to slam the door so that he has that moment when he wakes up and he can have that experience of that she's still there. But only that the cruel revelation that she's dead once again. I don't know why he would inflict that on himself, although I guess he's not going to remember it unless he can condition himself into it in some way. But then he burns those things. And another great piece of dialogue there where he says, I can't remember to forget you. Again, how can he heal when he can't feel time? So yeah, wow, what a film. And I can't wait to discuss it in even more detail when Alan joins the conversation. All right, Alan. So you've heard my preamble to this whole conversation. But before we get to all of that, question I had for you, a couple of questions. So did you watch the Super Bowl?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Well, I watched a ton of football anyway. So yeah.
Well, I know. That's why I was asking. Were you rooting? I was curious if you were rooting for Seattle for the fact that your boy was playing there, or do you feel like you missed the boat?
Well, I mean, you could say we missed the boat, but I find someone to be a very small and bitter person if they're going to root against Sam Darnold because he's not on their team anymore or whatever. But I also still insist that it was the right decision to let him go. Like, I mean, unless obviously you have like a pure crystal ball. But even then, the people who imagine like, oh, imagine if we had Sam Darnold. Well, yeah, we were making a whole play for like doing the cheap rookie deal on a top 10 quarterback that we put a lot of draft capital into, and then we'll have more money to spend on these other free agents. Well, you'd have to take away a bunch of those free agents if you had kept Sam Darnold. And also he just looked so bad the most important last two games with the Vikings, where it was first a game to get the number one seed versus being just a wild card team, and then the next was a playoff game, and he looked like total crap. And so, I don't buy into that at all. That like, oh, they screwed up. I don't think they should have fired the GM. I'm completely at peace, and I still think JJ McCarthy's going to be good. So I'm a Pollyanna, but I'm totally fine.
No, I think
I did root for Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah, and I rooted as well. I mean, he started the Jets, and that whole disaster, that fiasco of his first year with the Jets. But so always been rooting for him.
Was seeing ghosts out there. I don't know why people. Yeah, I don't know why people make so much fun of him like that. And reacting that way, I think, just makes every athlete like just so like careful and scared to ever say anything. I like that he just kind of was talking about how he felt.
I've always liked him. I just think, even when I didn't think he was going to ever win a Super Bowl, I, like you said, I think it worked out for everybody. There's no guarantee that he would have played like this back in Minnesota. Minnesota had a strong season and they're rebuilding still. And it worked out for everybody. So it worked out for everybody. So did you watch the Bad Bunny halftime show?
I kind of half watched it. Yeah. It's not like my genre of music, obviously. And I was not really like that aware that, as I learned this week, that he's like the most streamed artist on Spotify in the entire world. Like, whoa, okay, that's pretty heavy. But so it's interesting, I guess there's like a whole kind of controversy with, the usual suspects on the right, like being like, this is un-American or something. That's pretty silly or just pretty gross or something. But yeah, I thought it looked cool that they were kind of, I should have paid more attention. Maybe I could go back and look at it, that they were doing some kind of like little sort of Broadway play or something that wasn't just sort of, like let's play some hits or whatever, but they were doing some little scenario or something. They had like sets and everything. I didn't really follow it closely, but
yeah,
it looked kind of cool.
I thought that was the most impressive part about it. As far as Bad Bunny goes, I'm not a huge fan of reggaeton in general. He's extremely well respected, by the way. It's just not my cup of tea. We have friends that are Puerto Rican, or one member of the couple is Puerto Rican, and of course they love Bad Bunny. He's the biggest star internationally. I mean, he's very popular in the United States, but massively popular around the world. So if you want to make the NFL a international game, then that ties into it. But like, for example, like his very first album, Pitchfork had it as like the 10th best album of the year last year, like unanimously, pretty much. Okay. It not only did it win the Grammy, but it was Billboard's #1 album. It was like Pitchfork's #2 album. It's pretty much the unanimous pick And they didn't do much off the new album, by the way, but I actually have listened to the new album, and he's now become more alternative, and he's mixing
Oh,
together all these
okay.
genres in interesting ways. And that is
Well,
more
send
my
something my
cup of
way
tea.
if you think I might like it.
Yeah, you know what? His most popular track off the new album, I'll definitely send it your way because
Okay.
it's interesting what he's doing from a production standpoint. But most of the stuff he was playing was some of his older hits where it was more straight up reggaeton. I'm not a huge fan of reggaeton, so it was not really my cup of tea. But from a
Yeah.
production standpoint, I was really impressed with exactly that. And Darren and I discussed it as well. Exactly what you brought up is that traditionally, you get up on a stage and maybe some dancers come out and that's about it, but the
Right.
camera is like moving through this field. There's like they're like on a plantation. They're moving inside of houses. It was very
Right. That's what
cinematic,
I saw where
basically. Yeah,
he was actually going inside some sort of like it's supposed to be like an apartment or a hotel room or something like that. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
yeah. And then he's like meeting different characters on the street, and they're like playing dominoes, and he's like having a drink, and it's like it was very like really thought out, basically. So interesting.
Or actually, that reminds me too. One thing I was wondering as part of it when I saw was whether he really was doing some of that indoor stuff live or if he
Right. If it was
was just
pre-recorded, yeah.
doing like a yeah pre-recorded because there's I don't know if you've seen the Taylor Swift Eras tour deal, and she had stuff like that where it
Yeah.
was like clearly pre-recorded and then she just pops out from behind
Right.
another spot. You're like there's no way physically she could have done what they're sort of portraying her as having done or whatever, but I kind of wondered if that was going on with Bad Bunny.
The funniest thing about this, of course, is that whether people liked it or not, and definitely some people didn't like watching it, but they did watch it. Of course, that's all part of this, that the ratings for the the halftime show were actually slightly higher than the peak ratings for the game itself. So that's
Oh
pretty
wow,
funny. And even
that's
better than
wild.
that was that this counterpoint that this guy's not representing America. You know who represents
Right.
real, good, clean family
Kid
values?
Rock.
Kid Rock. But the biggest
And
vindication
that
of
was only
all
like
this,
3 million people versus 130 million
130
or something like
exactly.
that. In theory, they could have gotten somebody big in the country world, but
Yeah, there definitely
yeah,
are artists out there that
best not to touch that.
they could have had a more appealing lineup for sure. I'm not trying to sound that nobody in the I don't want to. I just find the whole thing very funny that like Kid Rock of all people,
It is, yeah.
and not even that I hate Kid Rock, all of his music. I don't agree with him politically at all, but I'm saying that I don't even hate all of his music. It's just very funny that it's like,
Right.
he's so popular. I'm like, so popular. He hasn't been on the radio in like 15 or 20 years since he's had a popular song. So, I mean,
And I
hold
don't
your
know how
horses.
much of a kid he is at this point.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, yeah, he has to retire the Kid Rock for sure. I had not seen him
Yeah.
until I saw him on like one of these interviews, and he's like all sunburned and looks like he's 60 years old. And
Right.
I'm like, man, this
Right,
is
like-
yeah, he's not aging well here. And lip
One
syncing
of those people
his
that
concert.
Oh, did he really? That's lame.
Yeah, he admitted to it on that interview because I guess apparently he was not
that's-
matching up with the backing track.
Oh, ouch.
All right, enough about all that mess. All right, let's talk about Memento, of course. So this movie impressed you so much that not that it made you forget about 9/11, but you were like, okay, I think we've just had a terrorist attack on the country, but I did just see Memento, and you're like, I'll get back to that later. Got to follow up on this Memento.
Right. Which, is probably unthinkable to you in New Jersey. But the thing is that what has to be noted, even though I was like, so there's a to be fair, but a to be fair to the to be fair. I was in, the middle of the heartland, far away from all that happening here in Missouri. And I've lived other places, mainly in Minnesota since then, but I was living
listening
in
to
Missouri
Kid Rock, probably.
Yeah, that's right, of course, yeah. But I had that was only 4 years after I had lived in Jersey City. So, with the Twin Towers like looming up overhead.
Right there. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. But and I temped over in Manhattan and sometimes would go over on the path to the WTC station or whatever. So that was not just some far away unfamiliar thing to me, but it's really just more that I was so freaking hypnotized by Memento. And you hear this story commonly about people, from when they first saw the movie, that they just become obsessed for a day or two. And I was so caught up in that the 9/11 thing just couldn't shake me loose. I mean, I would not have predicted that it was that strong an effect, but it turned out to be.
But tell me about that first experience. So what was it about it that was so undeniable?
I mean, I guess it's seeing it again. It reminds me too that it's the clockwork of it is so meticulous and perfectly put together. And even when I reflect back on it, and I just saw it a couple of days ago, I I can't even think how it was possible. Because certainly once you've seen it a few times, you can see different parts and you can kind of connect in your head. But that how it can be possible to the first time you watch it to have this crazy, you know, not even exactly backwards, because of course it goes forward for a few minutes, then other than the very, very opening scene, it goes forward for a few minutes and it jumps back. And so it has, it shows a little, teeny little bit of overlap to get you situated. But the fact that you could make any sense out of that and slowly have different things dawn on you, and yet it's never really a cheat. Like it's still, you know, as I verified at some point, it still makes sense if you just watch it forward. And you talked in your opening kind of monologue about how it still holds up that way. It's not as cool, but it still does hold up that way. And just my mind boggling at the story could be constructed that way, and also just how incredible all the editing and the cinematography, just it's just an overwhelming experience. There's no other film. You could say there was never any film like it before, but also there has never been any since that I know of. Like no one's ever pulled off anything like that. So just a sui generis or whatever. It was kind of a scenario, I guess.
Have you ever seen any of these other films that are explicitly in reverse? Like there's that Jeremy Irons film where it's like a marriage falling apart in reverse. Was it Betrayal? Is it called Betrayal? Or Irreversible?
Oh,
Have you ever seen
okay. Well,
Irreversible?
I've heard about that, and I think I saw like the most controversial scene from it. Kind of
There's
harrowing
a couple
scene.
of them.
But
Yeah.
okay, so that's right. That okay. So I misspoke when I say that it hasn't been done. Since then, because you're right. That is done that way.
Well, this is a little different. I mean, I just wanted to add that as context to your comment, but not to refute it, because there is something else going on here. Like you mentioned, this story is kind of like meeting in the middle in a way, which
Right.
is
That's
unique
true. Yeah.
in the way that it's toggling and like these, in that I don't think I've ever seen before. Although there has
Yeah.
been these, and I mean, Irreversible may have been after, I'm pretty sure it came after this anyways.
Oh, it definitely came after. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I guess now that you remind me that it has happened since then, I'm thinking that it could even be a little like the scenario with Groundhog Day, where there was Groundhog Day invented the what is that genre even called now? The kind of you know what I mean? Like this scenario where you just keep reliving the same day or whatever. Like it's like the time,
And
not
there's like
time
little
skip, but
variations.
yeah, or you can just keep redoing it in different ways. Or so Groundhog Day did that, and then for quite a few years, it was just like, oh, they were the only ones who ever did it. But then like 20 years later, a bunch of different people did. There's that Happy Death Day.
Yep.
There was the one that was on Hulu. The Palm Springs, I think it was called. There's been
Yep.
actually quite a few of those. And it became a genre, but then they all have to look back at Groundhog Day is the one that invented this time loop movies, I guess, and so I feel like Memento invented this, and you're right, it has been done to some degree since then. But now you said on your monologue, that your intro, that you, or maybe I misunderstood you, but I thought you were saying that even when you first saw it, that you could tell that the black and white thing was moving its way forward to meet the other one, sort of halfway or whatever. I did not see that coming at all. That totally took me off guard, actually.
Oh, I'm not in the immediately in the first few minutes of the film, but as I was watching the film, I started to assume that we're moving forward in one direction, backwards in the other. That these
No,
stories are going to
yeah,
meet, right? So,
but see, this is we always notice this. I think when we talk about TV and different stuff, that you have the kind of brain that is analyzing, predicting. You don't always get the predictions right, but often it's pretty clever, and you're leaning towards that. Whereas I kind of, as much as I'm into cinema and TV and everything, I seem to have a little bit more of a kind of naive way of watching, like where I'm not like, just Joe America who's just watching like dumb content and looking at his phone. I watch intently, but somehow I'm just still like, just naively like letting myself be carried along without sort of anticipating or analyzing to figure out what are they going to pull on me next or whatever. Or maybe I'm just dumb and I'm trying to make excuses for it.
No, I don't think so at all. And I don't think that's necessarily first of all, Darren has said the exact same thing when we've podcasted together, that he prefers to just kind of have it wash over them. And I feel the same way, by the way. Like when I'm really caught up in something, I get really
Right.
caught up in it. But even then, I always have this analytical part of my brain that is always, and especially with film, by the way, unlike music.
Yeah.
That now this is, I'm going all over the place here, but to focus on one thing at a time. With film, this is something that I always fantasized about, of making films when I got older.
Right.
So for me, when I'm watching a film, I love to think about like, wow, how did they do that? So even when I'm caught up in something, and Memento is a
Right.
perfect example of this. The reason I liked it so much is because you can rewatch it. Every time you rewatch it, you have these different elements that come to the fore. But the first time I watched it, I'm not like in my preamble, I mentioned that in those last 20 minutes when that photo gets slid under the door, I honestly did not know what was going to happen next in this film. My heart
Yeah.
was racing, my hands were sweaty. I was so
Oh,
thrilled
yeah,
by
for
the
sure. Yeah.
experience of watching the film, even as I was analyzing it, which you can't. That's the other thing that's interesting about it and why it's so magical and how it works. You have to. You cannot not analyze the construction of this film. You can't just be like, I'm just going to let stuff happen. And like, some people, I love Lynch. I talk about how much I like Lynch, and his films work for me also really carry me away, because what works for him is that it's all in dream logic. It makes perfect sense to me. But since in some cases, like the transformation of a character will begin with one person and end with another, like there's not that clean, this is the purpose of this person mechanically in the plot.
Right.
And he's
Right.
just intuiting stuff. For me, I can't parse his films, so I have to just feel them. And that's what I like about them.
True. Yeah.
And that's why I like it so much, because it forces me to get out of my own head in
Yeah.
a way while I'm watching them.
Right.
And this is so different, even though he's definitely influenced by Lynch, Nolan, that is. Nolan is so technical. You cannot watch Memento or Inception or any of these other films and not think about the construction of the storytelling. He's putting the screenplay, like he is confronting you with the structure of the story. You
Right.
have to, part of the experience of watching this is breaking it down, and yet it is thrilling and you get caught up in it. And that's kind of the magic of his films.
Yeah.
At their best. He doesn't always pull it off, in my opinion.
Yeah. But I have to confess, there's one, and of course, we're talking about, it's now literally just short of 25 years since I first saw this, but I still do remember, though, that it took until the second viewing that I caught, what is her name, Natalie?
Natalie.
That that I even caught at all that she went around and took away all the pens. Like I was just
Right.
kind of listening to her
Yes.
talk and not really paying attention to what she was doing. And so it was totally not until and so then when he was like desperately searching for pens, I'm like, oh crap, I guess there's just not any pens around,
Oh no, she grabs them all. She's
right,
and when she's telling him, she goes, I'm going to do this to you right now.
Right.
and you can't do anything about it. And it's so incredible. That sequence, and we talked about
brilliant. This, when I saw it the
so
second
great.
time, I picked up on it. I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. I think I had already, when I was reading all this stuff about it on 9/11, I think I had already watched it twice, so I was already just amazed by things that I picked up on the second time. So.
Yeah, I don't remember if I picked up on it immediately on the first. It was definitely early in the watching of it, but maybe not on the very first try. That maybe like exactly like you said, it's just like, oh, he's not going to be able to find a pen in time. But yeah, that especially, of course, if you've seen it more than one time, you notice that as she's telling him, this is what I'm going to do, she's literally gathering all the pens from her desk and from all the drawers, and she's walking out to her car with a handful of pens. It's hilarious.
Yeah, well, it's and she's actually more than a handful. She stuffed some in her purse. What's funny about it that I that kind of seems ridiculous that I didn't notice it the first time is that she has a lot of pens around that she goes. Like she was just loaded for bear with pens. I guess it was partly maybe that he wanted us to notice what she was doing, but I still managed not to. But she had so many pens around and she just gathered them all up.
I
And then she
accumulate pens
also
though, don't you? I mean, we have a drawer in the kitchen where we put all the pens, and it's incredible the amount of pens you accumulate from all the. My wife has like them from the hospital and from some event you went to, and the kids like my daughter will like has different kinds of pens that she likes, and she goes through these phases, and they just all
somehow
accumulate in the drawer. So
I somehow no, I guess I kind of wish that was the case. It's funny you mentioned that because yesterday I needed a pen and I needed it for like a project, but I have this one pen that I keep in like kind of a diplomatic pouch sort of thing that I carry to work, and I didn't want to go take it out of there because then I wouldn't have it when I needed it at work. And so like there's got to be another pen around here somewhere, and I was just looking all over and I got frustrated and actually in the middle of this just stopped and ordered a dozen pens. So I'll have some more. But then I remembered, oh wait, I think I know where there's actually a box. Now I'm gonna end up with 2 boxes of these. And I went and found the box, and the box only has 1 pen in it, but I don't know where the other 10 went, because I know there was one in that box, there was one, they're identical type, in this other spot, but I don't know where the rest of them are. They
But
just
so apparently there are people who lose
evaporate.
pens, and there are
Right.
people who accrue pens like Natalie, and she's one of those people.
You guys are, yeah, you and Natalie are stealing all my pens. Since what's going on
Exactly.
apparently.
And my dad steals all my pens, by the way. If I have like a nice pen, he's like, I'll take that one. Just all the pens,
there you go.
all the good ones disappear.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was amazing, especially on rewatch that Natalie did that. And actually she's got I would say the 2 best moments in the whole movie are both for her, as far as like that kind of like aha light bulb sort of thing, that at least as far as the best ones that are totally set up by a person, a character. And so there's the pen one, but then there's also the beer, like here you go on the house type of deal, which just seems
Right.
like, oh, it's a friendly, nice thing to do, the first time. It also provides a character moment when we it's one of the biggest clues that we get with her, that she's not maybe just a total evil femme fatale, because she's like takes some mercy on him when he's going to go for another sip. Like, oh, I'll get you a fresh one. That one's dusty. So
something that came later in my viewing of it, definitely not in the first couple of viewings, but I did call it out in this rewatch, was that moment where he goes, I'm supposed to meet with Natalie, and she's all angry. And of course we know exactly why after you see the film the first time. Now in retrospect, you know full well why she's so angry at him. And she's like, and he's like, you're Natalie. And she's like, I am Natalie. And she's like, I don't know you. He goes, you must know me. Then why do I have this a note to meet you in my pocket?
right.
And she just says,
in your
pocket.
Yeah.
That's all she says. And I love that. I just love it. Your pocket.
Now, like that does raise with me the question, because there's general discussion over whether this movie just is absolutely tight as a drum, or whether there's any, and knowing how you are, like we were just talking about, if there are nits to pick or holes to poke, I'm sure you can probably be one of the best qualified to do it. But that that is one of the things that I have wondered, is like you said that she must think that Leonard at least was somehow involved with killing her boyfriend. But like, how could she not just completely think it's way more than that? I mean, how could he end up with his car and his clothes, and he's disappeared without it being 100%? And then why would she not be more something? Like, why would she just sort of like hang out with them, even sleep with them and stuff like that? It's a little hard to connect those dots, I feel like.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with that. I think if there is, it works because the performances work. And I think this is often the case with Nolan's films. There's definitely a argument to be made that is a flaw in execution, and it works because of the performances.
I would argue that it works a lot, in part certainly because of the performances, but a lot of it is because of the reverse order of things. You
Sure.
don't bump
Yes.
on it as
Right.
much as if it was going the other way. Yeah.
But after you see it again, to your point, that you do
Right.
have to play this out in chronological order, and does it make sense? Because exactly that. So this guy shows up. He's in your boyfriend's car, wearing his clothes.
Right.
The guy has disappeared. He,
Yeah.
but then she sees that okay, he really does have this memory issue. Of course, Jimmy, her boyfriend, has talked about him. Jimmy seems to have hung out with this guy somewhat, maybe even has been
Yeah, that's true.
may have even used this guy to his own means, to his own ends, I should say. And so there's some familiarity there. And then she sees him being like naive, and there's something attractive about that to her. Also, he, of course, is wounded in his similar way. So, and also she probably is like, well, maybe I'll just keep him close and play like I don't suspect anything, because I want to
Right.
feel out like who's responsible, what's going on. He
So
obviously
what
isn't
would
self-directed, right? Because he
right.
doesn't have the ability of being so. So she wants to get to the
So
bottom of this. But then, to your point, then that she's like so cool with him that night, she really has to have a lot of faith. And yeah, and then or there is that underlying thing, when they are laying together in bed, that they are in a way surrogates for each other, and then that
yeah.
is, that there's some aspect of that too.
But so what sort of scenario? There's no innocent scenario. I don't think of this, but like she knows her boyfriend's not an innocent type. But what could be the
Why are you wearing his
the
clothes?
right, right, wearing his clothes in a guy's car? What could be the like not very sinister or very concerning interpretation that you could think of that could possibly be going on there?
What?
Just he said, hey, just let yeah, have some fun. Just ride around with my stuff for the day. I'm gonna go, tap out over here for a little while. I don't know.
Well, the clothes is the creepier part, because the car
Right,
is one thing, right? Like she knows
right, right,
he's making like a drug deal, and then this guy shows up, and she might be like, "Why didn't Jimmy come back? Is he in
right,
trouble? Did he leave town? Is he selling drugs somewhere else? Is he doing something and he's cutting me out for some reason? Has he
right,
flown the coop and I'm getting screwed
right.
over? Is that the handoff of the car part of this deal?" I can't ask him these questions, and you don't know because of your memory
Right,
issue.
right.
So all of
And
that, I
now,
can see that she just wants to know more of what's going on.
yeah.
But him wearing Jimmy's clothes is
And why
such a
why
red flag.
why did he take Jimmy's clothes?
Why
By
did
the
he
way,
change his clothes? Yes. Why did he change his clothes? That's what I want to know.
that's just a strange little maneuver. He's just like, give me your clothes, give me your clothes. I'm like, why are you doing that? What's going on here? But
He's wearing
he
like
just
this
liked him.
indescript flannel. I mean, like he could wear that. Why is he wearing? Why does he have to put his clothes on? A suit that doesn't fit him, by the way, right?
Right.
It's yeah. So
Although it does work well, as you said, for the kind of the thin Duke, Bowie thing, or the '80s kind
yeah,
of Don Johnson-esque kind of
right. Like the
deal. So
oversized suits. Bad Bunny had
yeah,
an oversized suit, could like make us bringing it back to the Bad Bunny performance.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I should note, like, that on this rewatch, I upgraded. I don't know, for some reason I had this graded as an A before, but I upgraded to A plus because I'm just like, how can this not, be in my A plus tier, which is a very, very tiny little tier, but I felt that it belongs there. So even though I'm willing to pick a couple nits, there's just not enough of them to not have me see it as a masterpiece. But just as it's more like this seems like a perfectly formed object, but let's pick at that a little bit. Okay, there's some tiny tiny imperfections if you use the electron microscope on it, and I would say maybe the one other one that you could say maybe it is equally big or arguably bigger is why Leonard even knows that he has that condition, because should the the condition itself keep him from knowing that he has the condition? You mentioned about this guy with untreated syphilis. Does he know that he has the condition? I don't know how that would work exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. There's a couple of aspects to it. First of all, I think that in general, every single film is never going to be truly tight as a drum. No script is that perfect. And you ride
Right.
along and
Especially
my
when it depends on so much, so much
right.
clockwork kind of mechanism, whatever. Yeah.
But my general, it's so funny because there are times even on this podcast where I have like really pick nits left and right, and I cannot get over them. Like a film or a TV show will just fail
Yeah.
utterly in my eyes because I can't get over it. But then there are some of my
Right.
favorite things to watch where I have rationalized away. And so
Yeah.
much of the mistakes, I think, not mistakes, but maybe like plot holes, let's say, in because I'm willing to do the work and fill in the holes because I like it
Yeah.
so much. So much of it is
Right.
just like, are you vested or not?
That's true. Yeah. They call that fan wanking online. You probably heard that before.
There you go. And it's exactly that. It's like that, revelation, or not revelation, but I guess like that experience of committing to filling in the gaps. But it is a self-inflicted wound, like you mentioned, because I can fill in all these gaps. And there's absolutely no reason, honestly, there's absolutely no reason why he needs to switch out his clothes in that moment.
Right.
It's not even like he does it to spite Teddy. He's like, I'm going
Right.
to do this. And Teddy's like, do not walk out of here wearing those clothes, which is basically what he
Right.
says to him later on.
Yeah.
He's not even doing it to spite Teddy. He does it before Teddy even shows up. I'm like, why are
Right.
you
Right.
changing your clothes? So
Right.
anyway, it's just a bizarre aspect.
Yeah, what's funny about too is like it goes back to what you said, the performances. He really sells the idea that
Right.
he's doing it like, just you know give me your clothes, like he makes you feel like, yeah, this makes sense. He's not fucking around. He's gonna take his clothes or whatever. But then it's what I guess Alfred Hitchcock called the fridge moment. Have you heard that concept before? Where he basically admitted that he had many of these in his own films, that it's the thing that somebody who watched the movie goes with, just kind of rolls with at the time, but then later they're opening
They're
up
at the
their
fridge getting a
fridge,
drink, and
right,
they're
and then
like,
they're
oh,
like,
wait a
wait a sec.
second.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I think he was particularly talking about in Vertigo. There's like a whole thing that with seeing somebody in one place, and then how could they possibly be there, and also in the place that they were like seconds later, which is like like 1,000 feet away or whatever kind of type. I don't want to get too specific because in case someone hasn't seen Vertigo, which was supposedly considered as of a few years ago the greatest movie of all time, which I'd call a little overrated. But yeah, there's this confusing moment in there, and that's a fringe moment. So
But the other thing I was going to say, that as far as his own, and this is something that, again, I'm willing to do work for this, but it is intriguing nonetheless because I think it is left open ended. And that's the other thing I was going to say, that I sometimes will forgive something if I feel like the filmmaker has thought it out. If they have an answer,
right,
I'm okay with that. I don't need to have the
right,
answer. If I feel like they have no answer, then I get annoyed. Is basically what it comes down to.
yeah.
But in this
Well, yeah,
particular
that
case, I think that the where I rationalize that, yeah, how does he know he has this condition? Part of it is, there's one explanation that maybe it has gotten worse over time. So maybe early on he was still able to make some of these connections. But actually, the way I interpret this is every time he comes to, he looks at his hand and he says, "Remember Sammy Jenkins." And it's almost like at some point he had that written on his hand where he could see it, not like the other ones that are hidden. Because
right,
if he comes to and he doesn't understand his context, that's there on his hand for him to be like, oh, that's what's happening to me. And if
right,
that's the case, we're not even sure he has this condition at all. Like, I mean, we don't know exactly what
right,
the cause of his condition is.
right. It
Maybe it's
might have
not
been better
Natalie's interpretation of it later.
right. Maybe he should have said, "You're just like Sammy Jenkins" or something. That
Right.
might be
Yeah.
a better way to explain it. But I mean, yeah, because I thought of like, all right, based on some of the clues that are distributed throughout the film, and that he maybe probably is actually Sammy Jenkins, that that maybe he doesn't like really physically have this condition or whatever, but it's kind of just like not totally fake, but it's kind of something somewhere in between. But then there are things where it's hard to take it that way, just because like he's so desperately trying to find the pens, or just perfectly happy to drink the beer that everybody's spit their loogies in or whatever, where it feels
Right.
like he really doesn't remember what had just happened a few minutes ago. So
Well, there's also the aspect of conditioning, and I do not know, to be honest. I do not know if he has read all the psychological studies on people who have this condition. Like, what's that book? The man who mistook his wife
Oh, mistook his wife for a hat or
for a
something. Yeah,
hatch or
right.
something like that. Yeah. So I mean, like there are like these really interesting psychological case studies of these very odd and rare conditions. So I don't know if he's done all of his scientific research in this regard,
Well,
but
I would have expected like, oh no, because movie people never do. They either
right.
don't care, or they want to just make the best movie they can. But I keep reading over and over that memory, it's kind of like Gattaca for genetics or researchers, that memory scientists and doctors say this is like astonishingly accurate, and it's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
beautifully illustrates the condition and so on. So yeah, apparently he must have done some research, or he got really lucky.
Yeah, the Radiolab episode that I recommended in my preamble, that I'll try to track it down and insert it in the show notes. It's got to still be out there somewhere. I looked for it recently and I couldn't find the specific episode. It used to be very easy to find. So I don't know if some of the episodes are behind paywall or now or something. But specifically in that episode, which was way after Memento, they specifically, the doctor who's talking about his patient, specifically talks about how accurate this actually is in Memento, despite he said he has a couple of nits to pick himself, but he says it's very accurate. But the conditioning aspect of it was the other thing I was going to mention, that there is some aspect of the repetition of something has turned it into, it has allowed it to be stored in a different part of the brain where habits are stored. And because you see, for example, that he comes into the hotel room, he opens up the map, he puts it on the wall, and he like has a routine that he does. He like looks, he has the shaving cream that he comes out right away, and
Right,
he
that's
has
a good point. Yeah,
so there are certain things that he's done so many times, which of course is chilling when you think about it. How long has he been doing this? How many innocent people have they killed? Right. So it's it's more horrific the more you think about it.
but then
And
why
yeah,
why didn't Sammy Jenkins stop touching the thing that was going to shock him?
that's a good question. I mean, his understanding of how much repetition would be required for to be, well, I mean, there's two things there. One is I'm not sure he understood, even if, or anybody honestly understands exactly what will be stored in this other part of the brain or not, or if you just keep trying until you do. But more importantly, is if we believe, and this is maybe another segue into what we should talk about, what we actually think is true and is not true, or if even all these facts are actually knowable at all, which is, of course, the theme of the film overall. But if we believe what Teddy's telling him at the end, then Sammy Jenkins, the reason he never learned from his conditioning was because he was lying about this condition and pretending, acting like someone who never could make new memories. And that's why the conditioning wasn't working, because that's what they were looking for, but he wasn't aware they were looking for that. He was just play acting at having no memory. And because Teddy says he was a con man, and by the way, he also wasn't even married. The story he's conflated,
Oh,
the
I
story
forgot that part.
he's mixed together, is he's conflated the story of Sammy and his own story. So I don't believe that he is Sammy Jenkins. I believe that he has taken his story, and then like when he thinks about Sammy in the institution, killed his wife with this insulin overdose, and isn't even aware of what he's done. And in that moment, we see, Guy Pearce in the chair just for a split second, that what he's done there is that he's taken his experience and Sammy's story and he has merged them together because he cannot accept the
Yeah.
fact that he's killed his own wife.
Do you know how, this is a nerdy little detail, but do you know how what fraction of a second it is? I can tell you exactly.
Oh, I don't know. How much is it?
It's 1/6 of a second, because we have 24 frames per second,
Four
and it's
frames.
4 frames. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And I was so proud of myself, by the way, when I saw that in the theater. I was like, oh my God, I saw. And I like even called it out. And my friends are like, no, I didn't see that. I'm like, it's there. It's there. I saw it. And of course,
Nice catch.
at home, pause it. There it is. It's pretty clear, by the way. He's not hiding it that much because he's like even in a different position in the chair. So I don't think that it's like so subtle that you blink and you miss it. His posture is totally different in the chair. I think Nolan wants you to notice it in that moment. So
Oh, I definitely think so. Yeah, I can't remember if I did. As I said, I missed some stuff that I shouldn't have missed, but I feel like it's pretty clear.
So a few things to guess at, and I think that there's, I just was critical, slightly critical of. I mean, I can't be critical to be clear on this on the following film at all because it's so accomplished on such absolutely meager expectations and means everything, right? So it's an incredible accomplishment. Period. It's basically like his graduate thesis and an incredible, full, complex piece of noir, very well done. But my critique there that would have made the film more interesting for me was to not explain everything to the viewer at the end,
Right.
and which I love in this very next film that he's kind of matured in that way. So my question to you, because I think it is open to interpretation, is Teddy correct that it was Leonard who killed his wife with the insulin injection? Do you believe that to be true or not?
I couldn't say like 100%, but I would say 90%. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's enough evidence. I agree, by the way, but I think it is open to argument. But I agree with you. And I think when you think about those moments where he's like pinching at her thighs, and then we see him with the syringe, and that it's really masterful the way he has, illustrates it in the fact that it could be it could be the type of thing, you're trying to remember something and someone gives you an incorrect detail, and then you play it out in your own head and you're like, was he there, for real?
Right.
Like you have
Right. The
that.
power of suggestion.
Yeah,
Yeah. It seems like
exactly.
it could be that. Yeah.
And then the way it's illustrated, the way it becomes like an insulin injection and then back to pinching her again. And it's like, is he right? Is he telling me the truth? And there's a few other things that I think are open to interpretation as well. We see at the very, very end of the film, maybe seconds before the finale, there's a moment in black and white where he's laying down. He has a tattoo, the reverse tattoo across the top of his chest, and written in marker, I assume, right on that spot says, "I did it," right? And she's
And
there with her.
you think it's marker rather than a tattoo?
Well, I don't think it's
I
tattooed
mean,
because I think he would have to have it removed at some point, right? So
well, right. That's true. I guess I don't know for sure, but I kind of took it as being more just like his
a fantasy.
imagination. Yeah. Like a fantasy. Yeah.
And in that moment, yeah, see, that's what's fascinating about the film. There are certain things we see in those flashbacks that explicitly we think we're getting true information. And even though I do believe that what Teddy tells him is true, agree. It's once again, you have to kind of go with your gut as you're watching the film in an interesting way. That is the fantasy he gets to tell himself in the moment that I did it. I finally killed the bad guy. So by the way, he's going to forget that immediately. But in that moment, with his eyes
Right.
closed as he's driving down the street, he gets to tell himself that story. And that's the whole film, right? It's just him telling himself a story about who he is, even as he is killing people,
Yeah.
innocent people, or, not fully innocent, but, guilty
Right.
for other reasons, not the wrong people, basically.
People who don't need to be murdered because they're just about to go and kill other people, which is the only real reason you can justify murdering somebody, I would say. Or maybe if they're just you could justify it under some kind of moral systems as revenge, even if they're not a threat or whatever. But yeah, people who probably should get locked up but not be killed, not be executed. So
Yeah, but as far as we know, Jimmy does not seem to be a monstrous killer. That actually is Lenny, but he's getting killed because he's got a bag of cash in the back of his car. That's why he's literally being
right,
killed.
right. Now, I know what I wanted to bring up. I emailed this to you also after hearing the preview of your preamble. That I think it's interesting that you interpreted it as that he sort of the big amazing twist of the movie is that we find out that he has purposely launched himself toward killing Teddy, even knowing in the moment when he does it that Teddy's not the guy who killed his wife, but that he's gonna get Teddy, and he's gonna do it in a way that he doesn't have to feel remorse or hesitation in the moment because he'll tricked himself into thinking that this is the guy, right? But that you feel that he did it so he could eliminate Teddy and get out of the cycle of being used by Teddy in this way. And I felt, not that that seems wrong or that he wouldn't want to do that, but I felt that his primary motivation was that he really, really hated having Teddy, call him on his bullshit and tell him the truth that, no, you killed your wife, dude. And he wants to never, ever have anybody tell him that again. So he's like, I'm going to shut that down so I never have to be told that, never have to be confronted with that ever again.
Well, I don't disagree with that either. And I think that the reason that he doesn't find another way out of the situation, and he could just be like, don't listen to this guy ever again. He's a monster. He could, like I said, he could just have a paragraph written on his thigh outlining everything terrible that just happened here. And he just has to write it on write it on a napkin before he gets to the tattoo parlor. But he chooses not to. He chooses to allow himself to remain in this oblivion of continuously. But I agree. I think that that definitely ties into it. It's not only the fact that if he doesn't take some action now, he will again do this terrible thing. And, Teddy says directly to him that, come on, you're not a killer. That's why you're so good at it.
Yeah. That's a great line. I forgot about that.
It's such a great line. Yeah. And, so it's this, he knows that it's just going to happen again. And he also knows that he's not a killer, that in cold blood, he cannot pull the trigger. But here's a way where he gets out. But in no small measure, like you said.
But in a weird way, he was, it's plausible. You can imagine someone being this way, like maybe like a drone pilot who couldn't, who can blow people up but can't, at a wedding, but they couldn't go and just like hack a bunch of people to death. But like he does have his cold-blooded killer moment when he writes down, the license plate. Like this is his moment of saying, I'm gonna set myself on a path to killing him. This is signing his death warrant. So that was the cold-blooded moment.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when he's like, "Can you be my John G?" Yes, yes, you can.
Right.
I love all those little details, by the way. Just in the tattoos, I love that it says James G on his tattoo, and then it has like written and like scribbled underneath it, or John.
Right.
It's like, yeah, so how did that or John get in there?
Right. And really, this isn't a nitpick with the movie or the plot, but with the logic that he isn't stopping to examine is like, what kind of, maybe you could come up with some scenario, but it's hard for me to think of a scenario where that someone's first name is something and then their last initial, like how exactly would that work? What sort of sleuthing led you to have that particular set of information?
Yeah, that all makes no. I agree that is almost like something out. It might even be an homage to some, film noir that I don't know about, but it does feel very, made up. That it's like, I know only the last initial, and
Right.
and you could even imagine like the first name. Sure, like maybe he heard someone say something when he was unconscious, or maybe like there could be some other piece of information, overheard a conversation, something happened. And, like he even seems to indicate that according to the police files, which he's read over and over again, that they suspected this other person, but they let him go because they didn't have proof of a second perpetrator. But once again, if they had suspected that person, then what was his name? Like, why don't we have information on who that person is? Even if it was redacted from the file, then the detective who did the investigation probably knows who that person was.
Right, for sure.
But then again, you can think that that's a manipulation as well. And maybe that's where you fill in the blanks, because he's like, we found the guy early on. We found the guy. Right. We killed him. You had this smile on your face. And we know he's not lying about that. I mean, that photograph is so chilling when you see it, because as soon as you see it, it's not only the expression, which is so perfect that they're like, that is this sheer joy on his face. And not only that, Teddy explains, you had to see the look on your face. Of course, we've seen it. We saw the photograph. But more important than that is him pointing at the spot on his chest. And beyond that, it's the fact that who took this picture? Like if this thing had just happened.
I assume it's probably Teddy.
Oh, I know he did, but I'm saying that that just gives more credence to Teddy's story. because it's like
Right,
this
for
is how
sure.
this is your mechanism of basically your memory management. You hand that camera to somebody else, like they can take pictures of anything and mess with your whole system.
Right, right.
So you have to really trust the person you're handing that camera to.
And I realized I should clarify, by the way, that I don't, the reason I say I don't see it as a plot hole or a nitpick at all about how weird it is to have, you know, John or James G or whatever is I assume that somehow or other Teddy has manipulated him
Yes.
into
Yes.
having those tattoos. Like, oh, those will cover quite a few people, so we'll just go with that, and then he could always add some other addendum later, or it might be John,
Exactly. Oh, maybe it's
John
John
and
also.
James
Right.
F,
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think that was where I was going to circle back to, was that that information may very well have come from Teddy at some point, and initially maybe Teddy, like I was outlining before, maybe Teddy did know who this other suspect was. He had the evidence; they couldn't prove it in court. He had him kill him. There was this victorious moment for the two of them, and now the cycle just keeps repeating. And exactly like you said, it's not the first fact he has tattooed on his body that it's a
Right.
John G or whatever. It's one of the later facts. So maybe very well could be that Teddy, either incepted it in his mind, or that he, let him come to his own conclusion. And Teddy could be like, yeah, I can make that work. That's vague enough. We can make that work.
Right, right, right. Like that part might not have even been added until after the guy was killed, and he might have been
Right,
named,
right. Mm-hmm.
Fred L or something. Might not have been anything related to John G or James G. It might have been like the first guy that Teddy wanted to get was,
Right.
like a John G, or he could think of a couple of them like that. Then he's like, oh, this other guy's James G. Maybe we can make that work.
I mean, now that you're saying all that, I think that is very plausible, in the fact that you can imagine when this first started happening, maybe he was going to he was going to the police department all the time with his wife, constantly
Right.
going there, talking to this detective, getting to know him over and over and over again. And like you said, he's just like, you know what? We killed the other guy, and he still keeps showing up. He has no idea this has happened. Then his wife dies, and it's like, oh my God, this guy's like a lost puppy now. And he's like,
Oh
you
yeah.
know what? There's this guy who got away with a murder, this drug dealer. And if I rub this guy out, I know where his stash house is, and we can get rich. So I'm going to get this guy to do what I want him to do. And like I said, that could be under the formality of he's still showing up at the police precinct every Thursday or something. And now at this point, they're like traveling around the country murdering people,
Right. This is again me being sometimes oblivious. I never thought about that he would have been very potentially going to the police department or talking to Teddy, all this stuff, when his wife was still alive. I just, for some reason, had it cleanly separated in my brain, like, oh, none of that happened until after the wife was gone. But you're right. If he had the condition before that, and it was still, even though it wasn't a murder, it's still a horrible, violent crime that he would want to solve and want to get the guy. Maybe even all the more so when the wife's still alive, and you don't want to have her have to feel like there's this guy out there somewhere that's attacked her. So yeah, I just hadn't put that together before.
I honestly had not worked all that out until we had this conversation. So part of the
Oh,
pleasure of
okay.
having this conversation is
Yeah.
working those things out. And but yeah, I suddenly started picturing that. And yeah, because you think about that whole, if you take the fact that some of what he is remembering could be early memories or stories that were told back to him when his memory still had some capacity, he still had some capacity to create new memories, and that he's conflating the Sammy Jenkins story with his own story, then those scenes with Sammy Jenkins and his wife and the insulin overdose and the investigator showing up at the door, maybe that's this police detective showing up at the door, and those memories are actually him at home with his wife, and he's conflating those things with each other. So, and because there was this whole period of time when he was still trying to pretend that he was a normal, husband, and even if she had passed away, he was still having some normalcy, although he very
Right.
well might have ended up in a mental institution later on. And who knows, maybe he busted himself out.
Right.
I mean, apparently
Right.
that's what happens in the original Jonathan Nolan story, but we don't
Right.
need to
That's
know
what I
any
heard.
of
Yeah.
that. If that's the case, we don't need to know any of that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This is making me kind of embark on a whole new path of pondering. I'll have to give that some thought. The sort of the interim period there when he's now. Do we think that this is like? I mean, because I have heard people say it's a it's hard to wrap your mind around or hard to believe the coincidence that he would get the same incredibly rare condition as Sammy Jenkins. But could it be like a social contagion, hysterical blindness kind of a thing that's why he has this condition psychologically, but not physically, neurologically, or whatever, that he, that it was a social contagion, or that it was, a psychological thing that developed, like sort of just suggestibility from Sammy Jenkins? Do you think it is something like that, or are we just going to go with it? It's just an incredible coincidence.
No, I mean, I have to, not assume, but I would go, if I had to guess, I would say that is, I can't imagine it's psychosomatic, that at some point he'd have to break through. It would have to break through if he's murdering people. It's the PTSD alone would have to break through some, whatever the barriers are that's, would allow that to happen. I would assume.
But
I honestly don't know about it.
Don't people that get these weird like conditions, like have you heard about, a lot of times it'll be teenage girls and they'll get like these weird like tremors and things, and it passes from person to person, but
Or
it's
like
not
the
like
dancing,
a real...
that like the dancing plague, where this is hundreds of years ago, but
stuff
yeah.
like that, yeah, or like things that relate around like voodoo and stuff like that, like people can be highly suggestible, so that seems plausible to me. But I mean, it does contrast, as I was saying, a while back in our conversation, with the fact that it doesn't break through whatsoever, even when people are spitting in his beer, or when he's desperately looking for the pens and stuff like that. So
yeah, that's where I feel like it has to be truly a physical condition. And yeah, I think it's just a coincidence that we don't know exactly when he encountered the Sammy Jenkins story, but it could have been when he was, it could have been a decade earlier or more. It could have been like one of his early cases.
right.
And, he's now a middle-aged man, or near approaching middle age. So
That's true.
It could have been something that happened a very long time ago, and he just happened to stumble up, he's making this connection. But that's how I always read it, that, yeah.
Or could Sammy Jenkins not exist?
Yeah, the whole thing is made up. Although, and then
I don't mean it's all made up. I mean that it's
all him.
Something that only happened to him, and that he has this name for this other guy who killed his wife, even though that's really him. But that no one named Sammy Jenkins ever was, one of his cases or anything like that. He's just taken his own story and labeled it as this other guy to shield himself from the part of it where his wife is killed.
I if I have to come down on one side of that, but I like the ambiguity of the film in general, so I'm not going to put too much stake into it. But my general read of it is that everything that Teddy tells him at the end is either true or true as far as Teddy knows. And when he's like, Sammy Jenkins was a liar. You were right. He was a fake. He didn't even have a wife. And, saying that, and you're the one who did, killed your wife with the insulin injections, that I believe him when he's telling you that, because he really doesn't have any reason to lie to him in that moment.
Right.
So, and now he could be wrong. Like he could be wrong about that too. But I think that, and this is also from the point of view of like the construction of the film. The film is rarely clunky in anything it's doing. It's almost perfect across the board.
Oh yeah.
But I feel like that whole section at the end, and once again, it works because, not only Teddy, the actor, what's his name again?
Oh, it's shoot. He was just on
Wonder Man.
Yeah, just on Wonder Man. Joey Pants. Joey
Pants.
Pantoliano.
Yeah. Joey Pants, so great in all those scenes.
He seems like he must be from New Jersey. He's gotta be.
I mean, if not, he in spirit he is. But he's so incredible in that performance, and the way he sells those lines. He goes, he lied. He goes, and like, so his performance is incredible, and also again, just Guy Pearce doing an extraordinary performance here. Just having to just take all this in, and the way he's accepting it or rejecting it in the moment, all of that works on the performance level. However, from a script perspective, it is literally just the only time we have just a giant information dump. And so in general, I feel like here is Nolan like finally giving us, like, he just has to clean things up here. There's only 5 minutes of movie left here. And so
Right.
I feel like he's doing a lot of bookkeeping there in that part of the movie. But I
But
could be
so,
wrong. It
okay,
could be more ambiguous than I'm reading it as.
but so if Sammy lied and he didn't even have a wife, then what does that leave us with? Like, what was his actual story that isn't sort of obliterated by that description?
Yeah, so I feel like, but my interpretation of it is that Sammy was lying. He was investigated. It was a false claim, and that Leonard figured it out, and so that's in his memory bank, that this case from years before, and then when this happens to him, and people are explaining to him, you have this condition. In his own mind, he's like, "Oh, that's like that case that Sammy Jenkins years ago." This is now I'm writing this whole thing in my head, by the way. So
Right.
I'm not saying this is
I
in the text
noticed.
of the film.
I noticed you said Jenkins again. You mentioned that in your
It's very
preamble,
hard
and I
to
always,
not say Jenkins for me.
yeah, I struggle with that too. And I was wondering, is Jenkins even a name? Like, do they just do that because I heard Vince Gilligan one time talk about how you're supposed to find names that don't match anybody in the same state that the show takes place in or whatever. So they have to really struggle sometimes to do that. And I don't know why, because I've never seen anyone named Jenkins. Have you, other than this
No,
movie?
not that. I've never, not myself, but I mean, there are
Yeah,
really strange names that do exist in the world. So it is
that's true.
possible that they exist somewhere. But yeah, I cannot not say Jenkins, which is a pretty common name, versus
Yeah,
Jenkins. What is Jenkins? I've never heard of that
right.
in my life. A
Hungarian
couple
or something. I don't know.
a couple of the things I wanted to bring up that we're obviously going to see in Nolan's films, that even though his films are kind of, and we'll get into some criticism of some of his films later on, I think you're even more mixed on. It's interesting, when I looked at your list, part of the reason I wanted to do this rewatch with you is looking at your list of Nolan films. There are films that I like very much that you don't like that much, and then there are films that you rate
Right.
higher that don't really work for me. So I think it's going to be interesting because we probably
Yeah,
have
and we,
the ones we like don't always line up.
yeah, and we've already had with following. You expressed what I find is a very commonly stated viewpoint, that it's like, oh, it's really well done for basically just a student film or that kind of thing
Right,
or
right.
whatever. Whereas, like, I don't think it's as good as Memento, but I do think Following is actually one of his best movies. Like, just set aside all that, like, for anything though, just as a movie, I think it's one of his best, and not that many people look at it that way, but so we've already had one that I think I definitely rate higher than you.
And this is, I think, maybe the only time we're going to be in complete agreement. Well, no, I think there's at least one other time we'll be completely in agreement. But on this one, which is probably like still probably his high watermark, in my opinion.
Yeah, which I think is relatively uncommon viewpoint. There's so many people that love, well, especially like The Dark Knight, I think is often touted as his masterpiece or whatever, which we'll get to that, but I'm not quite in that camp.
Yeah. That's definitely, yeah, there's this in many estimations, even when you see people, and of course that's the other thing about Nolan, he has, partially because of this movie, it began with this film but just continued to grow film after film. He has such an enormous following, one of the very few directors who can put out a movie and it will be a massive hit because his name is on it, regardless of
Right,
anything else. And
right, for
an
sure.
extreme rarity, like even a
It's
Spielberg,
like
of
him and
course.
Tarantino, I think
Tarantino, that's pretty much it.
yeah,
Yep, exactly.
yeah.
And by the way, I agree that it's him and
Or
Tarantino.
Scorsese, I guess, maybe Scorsese too.
But even then, like, people say PTA. PTA's rarely had a successful film, like box office
Right,
wise. The only
right,
people who can open a film and make hundreds of millions of dollars is Tarantino and Nolan. But more importantly, is that even with Tarantino, The Hateful Eight makes 150 or 170 million dollars, whatever it made, a
right,
solid hit. If he's going to make $400 or $500 million, he has to have the most famous people in the world in his films.
right.
Oppenheimer makes $1 billion. It's like
Yeah, that was pretty crazy.
and whatever, like Inception at the time. Well, of course, you had DiCaprio in that film, but aside from DiCaprio, everybody else is like an up and comer. It's not like these are
Right,
all or whatever. The Batman film, of course, it is a Batman film, but nobody in that film. Christian Bale's not a huge star at that point. And he, once again, he is bigger than everything. He's bigger brand than Batman. That's unheard of, basically.
Right. Now, did hasn't he had any, I don't know, box office stumbles, but like, underwhelming, like, I mean, were like what were the couple, like right before Oppenheimer, like Dunkirk and Tenet, weren't those maybe less successful, or am I wrong about that?
Well, we'll talk about the box office when we get to this individual
Okay.
titles. But I mean, I'll preview it slightly that Tenet has a lot of asterisks. If we're going to say anything that didn't hit the mark, it's that film. But we'll talk
Yeah.
about it when we get around to it.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, during the pandemic, I think like that movie made $350 million. I think the second biggest movie released that year made like 40 worldwide. So it's
Okay.
like it's not really like he was in the competitive
Oh no,
marketplace.
that is a good haul. And then so Dunkirk made a lot too.
Well, Dunkirk cost like 80 or $90 million to make and made like $600 million, somewhere around
Oh
there. So
wow.
I mean, it
Okay.
was
All
very,
right.
very successful. I mean, it
Okay.
didn't make Inception money, but I mean, it for what it was a hugely successful film.
Yeah. Well, that does tend to really reinforce your thesis, because out of almost all his movies, we'll get to it, but like I would think, Dunkirk has some of the least potential to be commercial, just if you just look at it as a movie, like setting aside I mean, especially considering it's a war movie order. I like it
And it doesn't
fair
have
bit
any
better.
massive stars in it either. So again,
Yeah.
there's a perfect example of a film that, there were other World War II films in that 5 or 6 year cycle, not as big as it has been in the past, but these movies made $80 million. Some of them were straight up flops, making like $50 or $60 million, and then Dunkirk comes out and makes over 500, I think around nearly $600 million. I mean, that's a
Yeah, that's
massive
wild.
hit, by any standards, but especially for like a World War II movie, which at that period of time was making. And why did everybody turn up to see the film? It's not like, oh, another World War II movie. We have to go see those. I mean, honestly, it was the only huge blockbuster World War II film since Saving Private Ryan, which of
Right.
course had also been a phenomena, but nothing in between had performed anywhere in that arena. And
Yeah, and
but people are turning up because it's a Nolan film. That's why they're turning
it
up.
yeah, you must be right, because I just don't think that one, if you just had him secretly make it and then you put some other director's name on it, I just don't think it would have done a lot. It's really must be about him. I think you're right.
What was that? I mean, the Oneer film,
Oh, the from World War One, the
1917. Is that what it's called?
1917. Yeah, yep.
I mean, that film
Not
gets Academy Award nominations. So that's the Dunkirk, by the way, but it came out like during the awards cycle. Everybody said it was going to win Best Picture. It did not, but it was like the front
right.
runner for a long period of time. And I think it made around $300 million, which was considered
Yeah,
fantastic, but half of what Dunkirk made. So
and I have to do my standard. This is where I get really nitpicky. I have to do my standard persnickety point of noting that it's not a Warner film. That people
right,
call it that.
correct.
It's a lie. It's a tour.
At least the tour, right? Because he falls asleep at one point, right? He gets knocked out.
Right, right. You can't start in the daytime, have night scenes, and then finish in the daytime and be a 2 hour film and be a wonder. That's just impossible.
Okay, before we
Unless
wrap
you're like the Arctic
oh,
Circle or
sorry.
something.
Right,
Go
exactly.
ahead.
I was going to say before we wrap up, a few things I wanted to bring up. One is that something we see in Nolan's films, which I think he's always in his screenplays, I always appreciate, even when the films don't fully work for me, is that he likes to throw comedy in to these pretty grim,
Yeah.
oftentimes films. And loved that, like it goes straight up Laurel and Hardy at one point where
Right.
Teddy shows up and he's like, "Who's that guy?" He's like, "How am I supposed to know?"
Right. And
Or
then
taking a
yeah.
shower, or he's like, "I don't
Right.
feel drunk," when
I
he's
don't
got the
feel
bottle in
drunk.
his
That's the
hand.
one I was gonna raise. Yeah.
My
Well, and
favorite
then
that
and
I remember laughing out loud in the theater and the audience laughing at the same time was the moment where he's like, "Okay, so what am I doing?" Because he's just in the middle of a run, and he goes,
right.
"Oh, I'm
I'm
chasing this
chasing this
guy.
guy.
Oh, hold on a second, he's
Right.
chasing me."
Right.
Love it.
Yeah, yeah. And there was another one that was kind of on the edge of my brain, but I think it's kind of horrifying, but it's also kind of funny the way that Natalie tests him with
Oh yeah.
everybody going around with the loogies and the beer. I mean, that's quite a good little prank. It's a good test, but it's also pretty funny in a horrifying way.
Right, exactly. And a couple other things I want to bring up more on production side of things. So first of all, just so impressive that something that I think filmmakers haven't had the chance to do now. So many people make like a $100,000 movie and then get handed a $250 million Star Wars film
Right.
or Avengers
Right.
film. It's preposterous. But in maybe accidentally, we'll talk about it as we go through his career, this amazing, starts with this incredibly small film. He's shooting it on the weekends, takes about a year to shoot. Following, he goes from that to pitching the script, getting financing from New Market Films. They want to get into production. They produce the film, but no one wants to distribute it, by the way. They think
Right.
audiences will not be able to follow this. So New Market distributes it itself, puts it
So
on
that
like
must have
30
been a
screens.
jackpot for them ultimately, then, since they didn't have to share it.
A huge hit, right? And just the fact that they had very limited distribution because they were indie and they had never distributed a film before. So literally, the film comes out on less than 30 screens. On word of mouth, people want to show it, so they don't have to go and like
Yeah.
beg to put into theaters. Theaters want
Right.
to show the film, and it plays and plays and plays. It's the middle of the summer. I was actually looking at the box office, and it was playing in theaters at the exact same time that Amores Perros was coming out, and obviously had a very successful run. And also The Tailor of Panama, another indie film with Pierce Brosnan, a pretty good film, by the way, that was also doing well, like as an indie film. And the Amores Perros ended up with like 5 or 6 million, which was good for an indie, especially Spanish language one. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, it's very good. The only film by Inarritu I think that I like. And then you have The Tale of Panama ends up with around 11 million, which it played into the summer. It got a big expansion, like played widely. And Memento never played beyond 500 or 600 screens because it was, that's as many screens as they could pick up, especially in the competitive summer when all these big blockbusters are coming out. But it played all the way until September and ended up making $25 million in the United States, another $15 million overseas. And then it was a huge hit. I remember like it had a special edition DVD. I don't even know how many, but I actually did some research on this, that New Market had a press release saying that by the end of the year, when the home video, it had made $59 million. So here's a film that cost $4.5 million, makes $40 million in theaters, another $59 million on home video. And then the next news article I found, it's hard to find hard facts on all these box office numbers, but there was a special edition DVD that I remember watching because they had a special feature where you could watch the film in chronological order.
Oh,
And
right. Yeah.
this
Which
film,
I just did manually myself at a certain point, but I never got to the luxury of just being able to press a button.
you just push play and it would just like find all the title edges. And it was very slow. I remember actually doing it, and it was slow because it had to constantly, every 2-3 minutes sometimes jump to another part on the disc.
Right.
But I'm sure somebody has made a digital, just tied it all together digitally.
What did it do with the overlapping, like, 10 seconds or whatever that you would always have for each thing?
In the DVD,
play?
Yeah, it played the overlapping scenes. I think there is, probably a bootleg on YouTube that people can find where they have trimmed it so that it's one smooth, continuous take.
Okay, nice.
And I think the whole thing's in black and white so that it has the continuous look and feel as well. But you can definitely find that now, and without any of the hiccups of a DVD. But I remember that when they put that out, I think it was like a 700,000 edition of the special edition DVD, and it sold out. So, this is one of those films that just kept making millions and millions of dollars throughout its run. And of course, as Nolan became a bigger star, people always went back to this one. So a massive financial success on a small investment.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned having seen it in the theater. I'm jealous. That's really cool. I've never seen it in the theater, but I've been able to see it on increasingly, more high def, devices or whatever. But I went back to look, because of course I know the exact date that I watched it, but I went back to check, and it indeed had been released on home video. Its first release on home video was like something like September 6th or whatever. So I was watching it like
you saw it
4
right
or 5
away.
days after. Yeah, that I could. So there must have been some kind of, I've been reading about the hype or something like that. Unable to actually see it myself until that point. But yeah, I mean, I guess it wasn't the first day it was available, but it was pretty close after.
All right. Some more really interesting production notes. Well, first of all, the thing I wanted to mention is as far as how he was able to scale up something that rarely happens nowadays, that he went from this, obviously micro budgeted first film to a $4 million budget for his second film to like a $40 million budget to his third film. That's, of course, we'll be talking about Insomnia in the
Hmm.
next conversation. If we can find it streaming somewhere, it's supposed to be on HBO, but it's not there. So we'll try to find it
Oh,
somewhere.
dope.
And then of course from there to 100 something million, and then only up from there. Not sometimes he's dipped back down, but mostly upward trajectory. But he said something
Right.
really interesting, which was that going from like a $4 million movie, going from Memento, which had 100 people working behind the scenes, painting sets, designing things, lighting, basically people in and out, like shepherding a team of dozens at any given time.
Right.
He goes that going from that to a $40 million budget to a $100 million budget, he was very comfortable there. He goes, the shock, the only time he had a huge shock of, I don't even know where to begin with managing this, the scope of this, was going from Following to Memento, where all of a
Right.
sudden he has like 25 people behind the camera, and he's like, "Oh my god! Like, what do I even do
Right.
with all these people?"
All of a sudden, you're Oppenheimer. Basically, you're
Yeah,
running this big operation.
exactly.
You almost wonder if that was part of the appeal of Oppenheimer. Actually, is that this is like suddenly getting this chance. Like his memory of Memento. Like, oh, now all of a sudden, go from being a guy in the classroom, like writing stuff on the chalkboard, to now I'm heading this incredible, massive project.
Oh, you're spoiling my take on Oppenheimer, but
Oh,
but I, no,
so
but I was going to say that, by the way, I'm like, I've said this on the podcast before. I'm like, if you are like a film studies person and you are looking for, I want a unique take for some paper you're writing in your film studies class, I'm like, you could basically take almost any movie and say, this movie is about making movies.
right,
And you
right.
can basically do that all the time. And by
Yeah,
the way, Nolan is obviously Oppenheimer. Of course, you're absolutely correct. But you know what?
yeah,
Inception. Think about Inception. You have the screenwriter, you have the director, you have the
right. That's
stage
true. Yeah,
manager, you have the actors, right? It literally
yeah.
is like putting on a movie. So, but here's what I wanted to mention, that so this film gets greenlit for $4 million. It ends up getting made for $4 million. However, at one point, they were going to up the budget, and they decided to scale back because originally attached to this film, Brad Pitt. Would you have preferred Brad
I've heard
Pitt?
about that. Yeah,
Would you have
I think
preferred
he
Brad
would
Pitt?
have. I think he would have done a good job. I mean, Guy Pearce is great, and I think we talked offline, or a lot of people talk about how he seemed like coming from this, and then what was the L.A. Confidential, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't that? Yeah, that he looked like he was going to become a major star, and instead he kind of just settled into kind of being a steady working actor. But both he and Carrie Ann Moss sort of looked like they were going to shoot into superstardom, and she much less so than him, really didn't at all. But yeah, I mean, Guy Pearce was great. He kind of it's hard to say that anybody could have done better, but I consider Brad Pitt a really good actor, and I think he would have done great at it. What do you think?
I have become a Brad Pitt fan. He grew into his style changed a little bit, or maybe I adapted to it. But I have an issue sometimes with how hard he was trying to perform in his earlier films. I really like 12
Okay,
Monkeys, by the way, but for
right.
example, I don't think he works in Seven for me. It's like he's too his performance,
Okay, I
especially
really
next to
like that one
Morgan
a lot.
Freeman. I mean, it's not the film that I really don't like the film for other reasons, but the
Too gross, and
it,
no, but you're into horror and stuff, so that wouldn't be the problem. Okay,
no, it is. No, it is. It's the nihilism of the film itself.
okay,
I mean,
yeah, I can
that's a
see
much
that.
bigger conversation. but
Yeah,
but I think about Morgan Freeman, who's one of my favorite actors, and so naturalistic, and Pitt trying so hard. Anyway, when he was younger, I could see him working and making choices, and that I found that to be didn't really work for me. And that's kind of
well,
where we are here. I really liked him in the Oceans films, by the way. I think he kind of, when he got to be
yeah,
the goofball, it worked well. It was when he was trying to be serious. And I do think about him trying to do like some of the things, the mannerisms I really didn't like in Seven. Here, brooding, I don't think it would have worked for me at this moment in his career, although I think he got better. I do like him now.
now there's a
But yeah, I
movie.
can't
There's a Brad
imagine.
Pitt. there's a Brad Pitt movie that hardly anyone has
California.
seen, but yeah, there you go. That's the one that convinced me that he was a really good actor. I
He
thought he was incredible in that.
I liked him in that. I agree. I hate that movie. The movie's not, I mean, I don't hate it. I just don't think the movie's very good. But he is
Oh,
very good in
okay.
that.
I
And
really like it.
that is early in his career. So I do agree that that's a better performance for me for sure than some
Yeah,
of the
I mean,
recent.
part of it is in that case. I think that he actually grew up around people like that. He hasn't played a lot of like really scuzzy rednecks, but he clearly has been around them and is able to. You know, we talked the other day about how some movies or shows. I think we were talking about in context of the Nolans that the Jonathan Nolan TV show, did the kind of like Hollywood like version of what sort of southern rednecky kind of people are like, and got it way way off. But so Brad Pitt's in California is one of the only ones I've seen where it's just you just nailed it, I thought.
Yeah, I actually buy him in that for sure. Here's some other less successful, I think for sure, options. When Brad Pitt backed out before they went to Guy Pearce, they offered it to Charlie Sheen,
Okay. I don't know about that.
Alec Baldwin. Might have worked. Might
Yeah,
have worked. He's a little too old,
might
I
have
think, at that
worked.
point.
Yeah, little too old, and it's funny to say because the other people we're talking about, but I feel like too handsome, kind of like. I mean, these are all handsome guys, but there's something different about the Alec Baldwin handsomeness. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, I mean, at that point, I don't know if he was still super handsome at that point, but
Okay, he's getting aging out of his
the
handsomeness,
head
maybe.
was
All right.
starting to turn into he's got the giant,
Okay. Yeah.
the big meatball head.
Right.
But yeah, he incredibly handsome when he was younger. I mean, like you think about
Yeah.
like what's the Hunt for October, like at that point in time, like incredibly handsome.
Yeah. Or I guess maybe what I'm saying is more like probably by that stage, around 2000, like too much of like news anchor kind of a look, like
Yes. Oh, I see what
so
you're saying.
Jamie,
Yeah,
what
like a little too. Yeah, a little. Yes, yes, yes. Like he's not like the
you don't
Miami Blues version of himself, which, by the way, would have worked really well, but not
right.
in this. Yeah. Aaron
Guy
Eckhart
Smiley.
was another. Yeah, Guy Smiley. Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
Aaron Eckhart would have been good. He's a good actor.
and Thomas
He-
Jane was also offered.
oh right, yeah, I'd heard that. I mean, he's awfully big and muscular. I mean, this character, we see him with his shirt off, and he's well built, but he's not so just huge and gorilla like Thomas Jane.
Guy
So I
Pearce
don't
actually
know.
used to be a bodybuilder, believe it or not. Although I assume he was probably like
Oh yeah,
in a lower weight class.
right. I would think so. Yeah, but he's very cut when he takes his shirt off. That's for sure.
Carrie Ann Moss was brought in. Mary McCormick was supposed to be the original performer. I love Carrie Ann Moss in this film. I cannot possibly imagine anyone other than her in it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Mary McCormick was she like in Battlestar Galactica? Or am I thinking of the
No,
wrong
you're
Mary?
thinking of what's her name? Oh man, McCormick. No, Mary McCormick she was in.
Oh, her. Okay.
You probably if you have the computer in front of you. She's done a lot of TV primarily is what she's famous for. And she was in a bunch of stuff. She played Howard Stern's wife in Private Parts if you ever saw that film. But she did a lot of she was a thing for a while. So
Yeah, she's very familiar looking for sure. Yeah, but yeah, it's hard to. I mean, maybe she'd surprise me, but yeah, it's hard to picture her doing this for sure.
and the last interesting sliding doors moment is that Dennis Leary was supposed to be the Joey Pants character.
Oh,
And
okay.
when he
That could
dropped
work.
out, it was Carrie Ann Moss who suggested bringing in Joey Pants. And they were worried about this being like, oh, didn't you guys just make The Matrix together? But of course, she knew him
Right.
from The Matrix.
Right.
And,
That's why. Yeah.
And,
But I read
yeah, go ahead.
that they were a little worried that he was seen as too
Yes, instant
scuzzy or
villain.
untrustworthy. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And Nolan actually
But
said
of course,
that.
he is killed right at the beginning. So how?
Right,
what else?
right.
What do you want?
Well,
He's killed by seemingly the good guy. So
But I think that's what's interesting about it. I think Nolan was worried that immediately we'd be like, oh, he's just this villainous character. So
Right.
he won't generate any kind of empathy from the audience. And Nolan has said it. He's just like, oh, I was so impressed by like all the shading he brings to the performance over the course of the film. And, I just love Joey Pants anyway. Who can do what he does, where he can be so morally bankrupt? Like you think about him on The Sopranos, be so morally bankrupt. And yet somehow in those moments after he like kills his
likable,
girlfriend and stuff, you kind of empathize with him. It's this really amazing thing he can do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and yeah, he's Joey Pants, man. He's just got that
That's right.
got
That's
that way
right.
about. I mean, I think I even again talking about how I can be naive or kind of spacey about things sometimes. Like, I think that as we went on into the movie, I kind of I don't know if forgot's the right word, but I kind of stopped really focusing on that. Always seeing him like, oh, this is the guy that gets shot at the beginning of the movie. Like
Right.
he's gonna die or anything. I just kind of was like going along with like he's just hanging out, being casual, shooting the shit, like busting balls or whatever, kind of just he's Joey Pants right on.
That's what's incredible. Once again, I don't know if Nolan is such a genius that he knew that this was going to work so perfectly or not, but that's what's kind of magical about the way this film works. By taking all these scenes out of context, you sit there and you're like, oh, it's a buddy cop film. Look, they're having such a good
Right,
time.
right,
And
right.
you have forgotten somehow, just like, Teddy himself, I mean, just like Lenny himself, forgotten that, oh, yeah, he shoots him in the head at the beginning of the movie.
Right. You're right. Okay, so it's not just me. That's good. Yeah, it kind of seems like I guess maybe that is intentional, or it seems like it could be because yeah, it'd be hard to like really get into the vibe if you just constantly think like he's gonna fucking shoot this guy,
Right.
like.
Oh, and by the way, I just pulled up his Wikipedia. Born and raised in Hoboken, New Jersey, so not
Oh, there we
surprising
go.
at all.
There
At
we
all.
go.
So,
Awesome. Yeah. I was gonna make him an honorary Jerseyite if he wasn't for real, but there you go.
I was just debating, like he was born in Vermont. No, he was not. He was born in Hoboken, New Jersey.
Awesome. Right by the tunnel there.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then of course the rest is history, right? It made Guy Pearce did have an interesting career after this, and one of my favorite actors, although
Yeah.
not the megastar that he could have been, but has made some really interesting choices, maybe saved from a very boring career by not being the it guy of the moment.
Yeah, just doing a bunch of like kind of mediocre action movies or the occasional rom com or whatever. That would have been kind of sad. Yeah.
Yeah. And anything else you wanted to bring up? Anything we
No, I
missed?
think yeah, I mean, one of the things that's kind of funny is I mentioned in an email that when we did following, I had the copious notes and you didn't have a ton of them. Then, I started listening to your preamble there and, it was based on a huge quantity of notes. But in this case, because I watched my girlfriend, I didn't really take any notes while I was watching because it just sat there and just watched it straight with her. So that's good that you picked up the slack, but I didn't note down anything to follow up on. I'm just going with the convo.
What did you think of you brought it up in your email, the preliminary email. What did you think of my 10-minute rule? You mentioned that, who is it? Is it Andy from The Watch? You said that he had a
Oh,
similar.
right. Yeah, it wasn't the 10-minute thing that he has similar. It's the Andy always says that TV shows teach you how to watch them, and then when
Yeah.
you use that same kind of phrasing, I was like, oh, because I know we both, you're not as maybe as big a fan of the Watch as I am, but I know you've listened, so I wondered if you got that from him because I don't remember ever hearing anyone else say that.
I might have co-opted it from him when you said that. The reason I mentioned that is because I don't listen to them as much as I used to, and
Right.
and you're the only person I talk about other podcasts with. So maybe we should have like a separate conversation where we
Yeah,
kind of
Metapod thing. Yeah.
metapod, exactly, review other podcasts, because I don't know why that show, when I do dip in, I literally cannot listen to a whole episode of it. However, I may very well have co-opted some of this from him, because I did used to listen to that show all the time. And part of me not listening to the shows, by the way, it's not only that for some reason I just bump up against the chemistry of the show now. I don't know why,
Hmm.
but and maybe something to analyze at some future point. But also because I just don't have the time to do it when I'm spending
Yeah.
hours talking to other people. I don't have
Right.
time. All that time was my pod listening time, and it's all gone now. So
Okay, interesting. See, my pod listening time is all time that's not taken out of anything else because it's just all like while I'm walking to work or I'm working out or I'm doing dishes. It's all stuff like that. Even I'm in the shower listening, stuff like that. Like it's never really time that I could do anything else because I'm already doing something else. But it's just something that's sort of is able to be done simultaneously with the podcast.
Maybe I should be more clear about that, about me not listening to podcasts. I still listen to podcasts exactly in the way you just described,
Okay.
but it'll usually be stuff like that's not related to pop culture because
Okay.
like my pop culture podcast listening has been monopolized
Right.
by watching stuff and reviewing it and etc. So
Gotcha.
that
Okay.
that part of my brain has been occupied by this.
Right.
But
Okay. Fair
but
enough.
the thing I wanted to mention is that I definitely did use it to listen to them for sure in the past. So I may have co-opted it from him in some way, and maybe
But
he's.
yeah, it's a cool concept for sure. Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I mean, I see what he's saying about watching a show. I don't know if I hold the rule the same for TV watching. Maybe I just need to think about it more. But I do think films
Uh,
very much are like that. I think films are because they can. I think a TV show, unless they're like I've been critical of like Netflix kind of spoon feeding.
right.
This is actually like a rule of thumb now for the way the shows are designed. That they assume you're going to be second screening or folding laundry while you're watching, so they kind of don't deliver the information too quickly. Other
Right.
than that, I do think that like when you watch Better Call Saul or something, there's a certain tempo that you need to get on the same page with the show. But I think that it's almost magical with films that if a film is good, that it can, transport you. You could be like running to the
Yeah.
movie theater and run into the theater and you're like, oh my God, I barely got here in time. Where's my seat? Where's the
Right.
popcorn? Sit down. And then all of a sudden the movie starts and it could be like a very meditative and quiet film, and you just suddenly your heart rate
Yeah.
lowers and it has taken you to a different place,
See,
and
it's
that's kind of
interesting.
amazing thing.
I think that is a distinction there because I think Andy would probably, if anything, say the opposite, that it's more of a TV thing, that a TV show teaching you how to watch it doesn't just happen in 10 minutes or 30 minutes, that it happens over several
Right,
episodes, that you
right,
sort of
right.
get slowly kind of trained on how it's all going down and what you should expect out of it and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I think that's why
yeah.
I may have, that's why I might have co-opted the concept from him, but I think we're
Right.
coming at it from a different perspective for the same
Yeah.
reason, that it's like listening to music. There's like times when like, you put on a song and you get transported for just 5 minutes into
Yeah.
a completely different headspace. And that is something that isn't like you need to watch 2 seasons of this show and then it'll teach you what it's really about.
Right.
It's like a
Right.
movie is like for me, that's what's kind of magical about a film, is that I can be like, oh, I'm just going to put, oh, look, I caught, one of my favorite films would be like just to watch is like Goodfellas. I'm like, oh, I caught Goodfellas 5 minutes in. Let me just watch this for a few minutes. And I'm like, I watched
Right.
the entire thing because it's just like, you just get teleported into another place. And then you're like, oh, that scene's
Right.
coming. Oh, that scene's coming. Right. And yeah, it's like undeniable in some ways. And, and people have different films that do that for them, but that's what I'm talking about. It's like the kind of like,
Right.
that the ability of doing that.
I'm kind of weird about that. I was just talking to somebody about that on a Facebook group today. That I'm almost, one of the Facebook groups that I belong to is the Rewatchables, and I'm a little bit of a fraud to even be in that group because I don't rewatch a lot of stuff. Like
Yeah.
I feel like, if it wasn't that long ago that I saw it, I'm like, yeah, I got it. It was great, or it wasn't, or whatever. I guess if it wasn't, it wouldn't be a question. But like, yeah, it was great. But but I'll just, I'll rewatch. If I rewatch it now, I'll, just like kind of already know what's going to hit. And
Right.
I know that doesn't appeal to me as much. It sort of almost feels like rewatching a sporting event or something. So, and then I just feel like too, like there's we talk about FOMO and everything. There's too many movies and shows that I haven't seen at all yet that I really want to. That if I rewatch, then I'm sort of Xing out, a time slot that I could be watching something new. So I don't do a ton of. I feel like when I look around at people in real life and people online talking and whatever, I feel like I'm really at a low end of the spectrum as far as how little I rewatch things.
I'm actually right where you are, and mostly because I always have so much homework that I want to be doing, like so many things I want to
Right.
watch. So I don't rewatch stuff, even stuff that I love. And then I sometimes am afraid to rewatch stuff because I had a really good experience with it, and I feel it's going
Yeah.
to get tainted. And I can't even remember now. Maybe as I say, continue to talk, it'll come back to me. I just saw something. Oh, it was One Battle After Another. Just remember. So it was
Uh,
seeing that in the theater and just being absolutely blown away and being like, that's not going to be as thrilling, heart racing.
right.
Seeing it in IMAX, there's no way that watching with my wife on the sofa on HBO Max when it premiered last in December 2 months ago. Then I'm like, it's not going to have the same effect. And of course, it did not have exactly the same effect, but I was caught up with it and laughing and hitting all the same beats
Nice.
and it was thrilling to
That's the main
watch.
time that I rewatch is when I'm showing it to somebody else.
Right, of
I think
course.
that's when it happens. Yeah.
And but it's relatively rare. I rarely go back and see a film again, especially that close together. Like maybe like a year or
Right.
two later, I'll watch it again, but not like a few months later. But I
Yeah.
did in that particular case, and it made the film just as good the second time around. But it doesn't always work for me in that way, and it's a rarity to have something like Goodfellas or certain films that I can actually just put on and get sucked into immediately.
Right.
More the experience is of seeing something 4, 5, 6 times, and each time it's like whatever that thing that didn't really work for me, that the performance that was a little bad, or like a
Right.
plot hole that I kind of forgave the first time around, it actually gets more exacerbated as it goes on. So that's another
Trouble.
reason I don't really like to revisit things too much. But to your point, I have friends of mine that have certain films that they love and they just watch them over and over
Yeah.
and over and
My
over
ex-wife is
again.
that way.
Just the
She
same
has certain
films like
things she
that.
just watched. Yeah.
Yeah. I have friends like that have been on this podcast actually that are like, they love whatever the original Star Wars films, and they don't like, they watch the new Marvel stuff or whatever, but they don't really like it that much. And they still say like, that they'll complain about something that happened in the new Marvel film, but then they love the original Superman film. And I'm like, do you think him flying backwards and the world spinning opposite and all the, the time traveling backwards, you
Right.
think that isn't a plot hole? Like, what are you talking about? Like,
Right.
but in their minds, it's the greatest film ever made, or one of the greatest films ever made.
Right.
I'm like,
Well,
it's all nostalgia, which is another.
yeah, the big, that's the thing. I kind of resisted to nostalgia, and the big one that I always bump on with that is people who are like, and maybe we'll differ on this, but people who are putting up on Mount Rushmore essentially with the one spot missing, I guess, the original trilogy of Star Wars.
Right.
And I'm like, one of these things is not like the others, guys.
Right.
Like when you go back and you think that Return of the Jedi is one of the greatest movies ever, like I have news for you. No, it did not hold up to snuff to the other three, but people just lump them all in together, and that's how it is for them, and whatever.
That it's funny. Like we could talk about the whole Star Wars thing. That's a whole other digression, of course. But it's so funny that even in the day, for me, because given my age, my film was Return of the Jedi. And I loved all the action sequences. For me, it was the most fun to watch because it was, first of all, it was on cable every 15 minutes, but also it was the fact that the action sequences, because the budget was so much bigger, and like the scenes in the forest and all this stuff were so cool. But even me, I was like, I never watched the Ewok stuff. When I was on TV, I would skip those scenes. And so it was funny that it's just like, even though that was like my preferred Star Wars film, and I loved most of it, 2/3 of it, I'd say, everything other than the Ewoks. I didn't even hate the Ewoks. I just, skipped most of those scenes. But
you might be surprised it's not the Ewoks that bothered me the most. It's the just recycling the Death Star. That's where I was just like,
which at the time didn't bother me the way that it does now. I mean, man, I got so annoyed when they did that yet again when they rebooted the franchise.
Oh God, yes, I couldn't believe it. And like they're doing this again, And then the other thing, this will be more controversial. I think the other thing with Return of the Jedi that my dad and I went to see it together, and we both came out of it and had the same feeling that it just didn't sit right with us to have this like redemption moment for Vader after all the evil shit that he'd done, and then have this nice like cradling him in your arms kind of moment and all this kind of stuff. But just like, no, he's he's gone beyond the Rubicon to be able to do anything like that. I really felt.
I got to tell you though, I remember the moment of seeing that in the movie theater, and the helmet is coming off.
Right.
And it was like we were about to see, Jason Voorhees' face or something. I was, as a kid, terrified of what's going to be under that mask.
Right.
And I'm like, what? Is just some chubby old guy? Like, what? What happened? Like, what a
Right,
disappointment. But I mean, I
because then
remember I'm
The
like,
Empire Strikes
I
Back
was
did
about to
some.
look away from the screen. I was terrified. I'm
Oh
like,
god, yeah.
what?
Well, yeah, I mean, they teased it out really nicely in the previous movie where you could kind of just see from the side a little
Yeah.
bit, and like, oh, there's some gross stuff going on there. I don't know if we want to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting turn of
So here we
events.
are off in one of our trademark tangents.
Yeah. Before we get another one, actually, I have to start closing up shop here. So we will be back probably in 2 weeks, I think, for the next one. And I
Okay.
have to try to find out. Maybe by then, maybe by then, Insomnia will be streaming somewhere so people can actually watch it. But
Oh,
we will be talking about Insomnia. And I'm going to rewatch it. And I'm also probably going to rewatch the original because I think that the
okay.
comparison of the two might be, and that I think is available to stream, believe it or not. That one's on Tubi or
Okay.
something. But the Nolan one is not available. But it's a Warner Brothers movie. Nolan has this relationship with Warner Brothers. All his stuff's available on HBO, and
Right.
this is not available. I don't understand how this thing's not available.
Yeah. Maybe it has something to do with the original or something. The rights. I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
know.
not
That's
sure.
that's kind of weird. But yeah, I have a funny thing with that one where I saw the the original foreign film like within I think the same year that it came out. Like it was pretty soon after it came onto home video, and then I just like didn't feel the need to see the American remake, and even though I did love Christopher Nolan, I still had the impression like, well, this isn't his story. I've already seen this good movie foreign film, but he's just being kind of seemed like director for hire kind of a situation or something. But yeah, so then I didn't end up seeing his version until like probably within the last 5 years or something. So that one is the one that's now more fresh in my mind, and I don't remember the original as well. But
Yeah, it's an interesting job. I mean, I'm always fascinated by adaptation in general and what you
yeah,
choose to include and remove. And
and he
I
just did that once. It's kind of
yeah,
this
yeah.
interesting little career like trajectory, and I was actually just a little sideline, a little side quest with adapting a foreign film, and then back to his well, and then he went into IP and whatever. So he's
Yep,
done some
yep.
different things, but he only did that one adaptation, it seems.
He also seems to get things like stuck in his mind that he can't let go of, and they just fester for forever. Inception was actually, we touched on this briefly in last week's episode, but Inception
All right,
actually began. He was planning to do it maybe at this moment. He couldn't get it off the ground. Obviously, it would have been a
right,
very different film than the one he made.
yeah,
Steven Soderbergh was supposed to make Insomnia, and the remake, or Warner Brothers had run it by him, and he said, actually, why don't we try Nolan? Because I just saw Memento and it's awesome. And then
hmm
Nolan was like, okay, maybe it's something I could work with. But he wasn't, hesitant to do so. And then when that was a success, he was looking for something else to do. And believe it or not, he was the original director and worked on pre-production on Troy, which eventually he did not do.
okay.
And that's when he ends up with the
Speaking of
Batman
Brad Pitt,
film instead. Exactly. And speaking of the Odyssey, right, which is basically a sequel to Troy.
oh
So
right,
again,
okay.
the thing that he didn't get making Troy, but he did work on that. And
It's like
apparently,
I'm gonna get back
since
to
then, for 20 years,
that.
was working on getting it right with this massive production that's coming this year. So anything, it's all we're gonna get into all these different
Yeah,
repeating rhythms in all his films. So.
it's still weird to me that he did Batman movies. I mean, to other people, that's like the central thing of his career, but to me, it just doesn't make sense with the rest of his career. I don't get it.
Well, I can't wait till we start talking about them because I think we have different rankings on those three films for sure. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, I've only seen two of the three, so there's one
oh,
still to be discovered by me. But I think a lot of
is it
people
Begins or is it Rises?
no, it's the third one. I saw Begins and Dark Knight, so it's Rises that I didn't see.
Oh, I can't wait to
So
hear what you think of Rises because it's not my favorite of his films. Is definitely, spoiling my reaction here, but one of my least favorite of his films.
well, I think that's really common. A lot of people say
Yeah,
that. This is what I hear.
but the reason I'm so curious to get your take is I remember someone gave it for me as a gift, the Blu-ray of The Dark Knight when I was working at a previous job, and I had just started to date my wife, and we threw it on. She had never seen it, and she loved the Heath Ledger Batman film. She loved it, and then I'm like, oh, there's a sequel too. We put on the next one, and she's like, "What the hell is this garbage?" So I'm very curious to see if you don't like The Dark Knight. I can't wait to get your reaction to The Dark Knight Rises.
I did think Heath Ledger was great.
Yeah.
I'll agree with that. I have a little quibbles about maybe some of this way it's scripted, but as far as just how his presence on the film, that aspect was great for sure. By the way, speaking of your wife, you mentioned about in the preamble about how she ends up coming in 8 to 10 minutes.
Yes.
I would advise you, because I deal with that all the time with my ex-wife, with my current girlfriend, and I just I just refuse to do that. I'm just like, if we're watching this together, I'm hitting the pause button, and I'll unpause it when you come back. I don't stand for that. You gotta just draw the line and just put your foot down.
Yeah, that's where we're at basically as well. But by the way, this is how people get trained to watch stuff, because if we're watching a show on Netflix, she can, watching The Beast in Me or something, then she can walk out and get on the phone with her mom for 15 minutes and come back, and she's like, "Don't bother rewinding." I'm like, "Yeah, you didn't miss anything. Don't worry about it." But it's very different when you're, especially again, that the first 10 or 15 minutes of a movie. I'm like, if you miss that, you missed all the context for this whole thing.
Right. And I think I still have not fact checked this, but I have heard that the opening, few minutes, the opening scene, opening shot even of a movie is like where a highly disproportionate percentage of the budget goes into to just really make a huge impact, but like just that the director wants to come in and just really hit you with something. So I mean, not always. Sometimes there'll be like a little, like kind of prelude sort of thing or whatever. But that often the opening sequence in a movie is a really big deal. You can think of James Bond movies, all kinds of examples. So you don't want to miss it.
I think the Bond movie is the best example of that. But I was going to say that now in the Avengers films, for example, they'll always have a big action sequence. And that was something that Matt Damon was discussing when he was talking about The Rip on the Joe Rogan show, also where he was talking about how Netflix gave them these rules they have to follow, where they have to kind of spoon feed the plot over the course of the film or the TV series. So the people, being critical of that, obviously. But
so this is the recipe for the gourmet cheeseburger.
Right.
You heard about that, right?
I want to get into that, but the thing that was interesting about, they brought up there, same thing, that you need a scene, an opening scene, something has to happen at the beginning to hook people in, because they want to keep them engaged so they don't walk away or stop streaming, because you have to grab people right away. In a movie theater, you could actually build to something, but now you got to grab people immediately, right? But it's interesting that that's how it is with streaming. But of course, it was like this with the Bond films, like you said before. And the other thing I was going to say is that this may all be true. You think about a very different type of movie like Magnolia, where maybe the reason that the beginning of a film is so expensive is that after the movie kind of gets into its routine, or even you think about Goodfellas as another example, once you get 10 or 15 minutes into the movie, you can have 5 minutes of people sitting at a table talking to each other, right?
Totally.
And there could be suspense and all this that happens just by basically cutting back and forth between two people's faces. And that's very cheap to shoot. The first 10 minutes of Goodfellas has like, you're in different time periods, people are in different costumes, you have different actors, you have to like put cars on the street, you have to have 50, you have to do like each one of those setups is a whole movie that you're shooting.
I thought it started with a oneer, or is that's later in the movie?
No, the oneer's later. That's when he takes what's her name to take Karen to the diner.
Through the club.
Yeah. Okay. The beginning is like where he's like, I always wanted to be a gangster, and he's talking directly to the camera. And you see him as a kid in the background. He gets arrested, and then he comes out of the police department, and De Niro's out there like, "Hey, you popped your cherry."
Right. Okay, right, yeah, and so then you mentioned Magnolia, and that's got the whole thing with the diver and the
the different film stocks and all the different coincidences, and then we get to meet the characters. There's like 10 different characters in 10 different locations in Los Angeles, and the camera is like shooting through the hallways of that like production studio and stuff. It's like, think about the number of setups to get through the first 10 minutes of Magnolia. It's insane.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And then when they get hanging out at the quiz show, they can kind of cool it down a little bit.
Yeah, or like when John C. Reilly's on that date with what's her name, and she's like,
right.
doing coke in the bathroom. It's like that whole thing
Right.
shot like
Yeah.
in an apartment, you know?
Right. Yeah. Just sitting there inside, or even when he's going into the other woman's apartment, and she's like, "Don't go in that door."
Right. Yeah.
You,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah. We should do a PTA series. That would be
Oh,
fun. The
definitely
Coens.
PTA, the Coens. Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
little list in my head of the, Lynch. Got to watch Lynch.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Lynch. We never got to see that Netflix thing he was working on, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's too bad. Well,
Um,
maybe the way they're doing with
the
Magnificent
Eye. Yeah.
Ambersons, they could just do that with the unfinished Lynch project too. Just get it
Well, the
all
scripts are coming out, but
simulated.
they announced that they're going to release the scripts so that people can read them. But
Okay.
I've tried to reach some of Lynch's unproduced scripts because I've been heard about them so many times, and it just
Mm,
doesn't work on the page. I think like so much of what he brings to it is the
the visual,
intuitive
yeah.
moment when the cuts and how to make something funny and scary at the same time, and the tone and the mood
Right.
and
Well, he's also a
you can't get
painter,
them.
so it's always
Yes,
going to
right.
be
Yeah,
and he's said it, flat out that he's basically taking things that he dreamed and trying to put them on the
right,
screen or
right.
whatever, and other people don't have that dream in their mind. So yeah,
Yeah. So it just doesn't, I don't think the scripts are going to work in the same way but yeah,
yeah,
that's definitely another one to put on the board. But
for sure.
so many great films to rewatch. And you don't rewatch a lot of stuff. Neither do I, by the way. Like even with this Nolan rewatch, I'm thinking about some of
Right.
his most popular films, other than like The Dark Knight, which I've seen many times because I really do like
Hmm.
that one. But any like Batman Begins, I think I've only seen it once. I think it's only one timer.
Yeah, I saw that in the theater. My friend wanted to go to it, and I went with them. And yeah, that I haven't seen it since.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff to rewatch. Insomnia, which I like very much, by the way. I think I've probably only seen it once, so I'll get to see it again.
Yeah, yeah, same here. And it was so far apart from the original that I can't even say for sure, like as a direct mental comparison, which I like better. But I was really impressed with the remake for sure. Oh, we'll get to that soon. But yeah.
Yeah. All right, Alan, thank you again for the conversation. We'll
Yeah.
pick this
Thank
up
you.
again. And I have a feeling that the next preamble will be shorter, but it doesn't mean the rest of the conversation will be. So we'll see.
Yeah. If you can tack on at the end of this, once you figure it out, a little instruction to listeners, that would probably help them be able to find it too, and then be able to watch.
Oh yeah,
Um,
find Insomnia. Yes, yeah.
right. Let people know where to watch it, because it sounds like it's a little tricky right now.
Yep. We'll have to see if I can find something. Yeah. So hopefully it'll pop up somewhere.
But if
All right.
nothing else, it's got to be at least like a $3.99 rental or something.
Yeah, it's definitely a rental. Definitely available as a rental.
Yeah, I can do that.
All right,
All
Alan.
right,
Thanks
cool.
again.
Yeah,
Talk to you soon.
we'll see you.